Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Meryl Blackburn drew in a deep breath as her daughter's friend's familiar white Honda Civic drew up the family red brick driveway, like it had done 1,000,000 times before, a hair's breadth away from their grandiose front door, that was proudly serenaded by 2 grand, resplendent Doric-style columns and a petite overhanging roof. She stood there in the kitchen, which had fabulous views of the driveway from the large windows, watching Cindy Wallace kill the engine of her Honda Civic and climb out of the driver's side door. The young woman ebulliently ambled over to the front door, with a pronounced, purposeful skip to her step. There was a smile on her pretty heart-shaped face that was so incredibly large. She almost looked as if she'd won $1 million on the state lottery. Meryl privately suspected that Cindy was feeling a similar sense of freedom her daughter would likely be feeling, about leaving home, stretching her wings like a fledgling leaving the safe confines of its mother's nest, and realizing that it could fly, and was no longer dependent on its parents anymore. Meryl knew she would always remember this heart-wrenching moment, the moment her life would never be quite the same again, as her daughter was leaving home. And there was a sense of permanence to that haunting, sequestered feeling that she couldn't shake off, try as she might. What was she going to feel like without her daughter around? Meryl dreaded to entertain the very thought. She had to somehow manage to get through this day, with a steely grit, even if it killed her. She bit her lip so hard she could taste the metallic taste of blood on her tongue, as she shuddered when she predicted she knew what would happen next, much like a producer in charge of a stage performance at the theatre, knowing the perfect sequence of events. And if Meryl had her way, she'd have stopped the show from going on any further. But the script had been written. It had to be played out. And her daughter was one of the actors. She was leaving home. Grow a pair, she told herself sternly. You're not the only mother that has watched her brood leave the nest, nor will you be the last. So accept it with grace. There are worse things that could happen. Meryl did not think there were worse things that could happen, but she'd soon find that her daughter leaving home would be the easy part of this day. "Cindy's here, Mum!" her daughter cried out. "She's here!" Her daughter's voice echoed through the house like a resounding bell, and was almost as annoying to Meryl as Cindy Wallace's grating, self-satisfied, rather smug smile. There was excitement in her daughter's voice, and a spirited enthusiasm that Meryl found cloying. It made her throat constrict tightly. She felt as if all the breath had been sucked out of her. She really did want to be happy for her daughter, but knowing that her daughter was leaving home to go to college in Boston was not something that she was digesting very comfortably. If she had her way, boy, her daughter would not leave home at all. Both Cindy and Frida were going to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to acquire bachelor's degrees. It would mean that Meryl's home in Georgia would feel like an empty vacuum without her daughter's spirited presence around, that had brought a bright, sunny energy into her home. Meryl's husband, Matt Blackburn, was a very successful orthopedic surgeon and would spend an inordinate amount of time at the hospital, devoting his time and attention to consultations and surgeries with his patients, while Meryl would be left to bounce aimlessly around a large house like a ping-pong ball, feeling so dreadfully alone. Meryl and her husband Matt had moved to this beautiful house in the Georgian countryside over 20 long years ago to begin their lives as a married couple. But where had the time got to? It felt as if it had evaporated as fast as the steam from a kettle or the wistful smoke from a chimney. It seemed like only the other day, when Meryl and her husband Matt had first laid eyes on this prepossessing red-bricked English country-style Georgian farmhouse, with its rigid symmetry and its hip roof and dormers, along with its traditional 18th-century double-hung windows and its stunning front yard with rambling roses and wistfully romantic flower beds ablaze with a tangled higgledy-piggledy mess of blossoming colours that reminded you of an old English country garden caught up in a poetry of enchantment. The prepossessing farmhouse Marden Hall had once belonged to an old English earl, who had purchased a sizable plot of land in the 18th century when he arrived in America to marry his American sweetheart. He was desirous to recreate his old English family home back in Georgia. So like an excitable kid with his Lego blocks, the earl skillfully built Marden Hall, brick by brick, with a devoted care and scrupulous attention to detail, recreating his beloved family home. Ostensibly, if you couldn't take the farmhouse out of the English countryside, like dragging a portable suitcase on wheels, you could do the very next best thing, build exactly the same house that you'd left behind here in America, which is what the earl had done. And his successful influence in the area was so pronounced that many other wealthy locals who loved the prestige of Marden Hall had copied the earl's stunning home. Back in the 18th century, the earl and his wife had over 8 children together. 2 of the couple's sons, at age 10 and 8, had unfortunately died of the smallpox, and the earl's little daughter, Lacey Stanhope, had drowned in the creek on their property. So the Stanhope family had experienced their fair share of grief, not uncommon for the time, when it wasn't unusual for people to die of ailments that have now been wiped out in the 21st century. But despite their obvious grief that the couple suffered, it would seem the large red-bricked family farmhouse was like a honeyed hive of happy memories. The impression of Marden Hall, nurtured from its historic bygone roots, embodied a happy congenial energy, which had indelibly imprinted itself on every loving brick that had been laid on these solid foundations by the late Earl himself. It meant that over the years Marden Hall had been sumptuously cosy and elegantly inviting. So for Meryl and her husband Matt, it had been the quintessential perfect place to raise their beloved, most cherished daughter, Frida. When Frida was a little girl, she had enjoyed playing with an imaginary friend called Lacey. Meryl had clandestinely wondered if her daughter's friend had been imaginary after all, but the ghost of the Earl's little girl that had drowned in the creek in the 1800s. "Mammy," her daughter would say, "Lacey doesn't want to go to the creek 'cause the creek, it swallowed her up and ate her alive." It wasn't long before Meryl connected the dots, and such a startling revelation that her daughter was connecting with a ghost child had left her with the chills. It certainly explained the cold spots that were sometimes present in the house, the sense that you were being watched from time to time, and the curious sound of a ball rolling down the passage that was frequently heard when no one was there, and from time to time the family often heard the cheerful sound of children's laughter and the rush of tiny feet up and down the staircase. But it was so commonplace and routine at Marden Hall that for Meryl and her husband Matt, they had grown accustomed to these idiosyncratic happenings, which became the norm in their home, like getting used to the sounds of traffic when you moved to a busy, bustling city. Suffice to say, when Frida got older, her imaginary friend dissipated. But Meryl never forgot her daughter's vivid encounters with her ghostly friend. The Blackburns had tried to have more children, but it was clearly not meant to be, and Meryl had been acceptant of the serendipitous cards that fate had dealt out for her, for she had considered herself to have the perfect life. Little did she know before long her life would be stained with the unpleasant, ugly blemishes of a past that had the power to destroy the perfection that she and her husband had created for themselves over the years here at Marden Hall, and had the unfortunate potential to put a muddy blur over her husband's illustrious reputation as a fine orthopedic surgeon. Something far worse than their daughter Frida leaving home for college in Boston was about to unfold. Something that Merrill Blackburn would never have envisaged possible in a month of Sundays. In the movies, maybe. In a novel, possibly. But in real life, absolutely not. But we all know that truth can be stranger than fiction, with the potential to be so incredulous you could actually say, not possible, that couldn't have happened. But I assure you, it did. Merrill considered herself a normal housewife, living a routinely normal life. But regretfully, the word normal would become outlandishly alien to her in the days that were soon to follow, that would throw her life haphazardly into the ether like a dice on a games board, so that the player of this game of life ultimately didn't know how the game would end. Would it be a win? Would it be a lose? You could never be certain. Merrill would do anything to save the life she loved from going down the plug hole, like the dirty water in the sink, and in the process would unearth a bizarre story that would make her resolutely straight hair decide to curl involuntarily. If you hadn't known any better, at a brief glance at Marden Hall, you could be forgiven for thinking you were in the heart of the Berkshire countryside in England, when you drove down that long, magnificent driveway, upholstered on every side by sumptuous eiderdowns of gloriously verdant pasture, being grazed happily by the frolicking black and bay horses that the Blackburns were privileged to own. Merrill herself was a fine horsewoman, but her husband Matt had never enjoyed the lack of control he felt on horseback, as like a surgeon with his instruments he needed to be in control all the time. He was not happy with a horse dictating his movements, or even just spontaneously going with the flow, while the horse trotted down the long spiralling trails through the trees. Letting go was not Matt's kind of thing. He was an intense man who took things very seriously, which explained why he was an excellent surgeon. Relaxing was not something he was accomplished at doing. So it wasn't therefore surprising that as a passionate, ardent horse-lover and a keen rider, all 8 of the horses were under Merrill's studious charge, and during the day they were contained behind long stretches of wooden pole fencing that fringed the grazing pastures and congregations of tall, lofty trees, handsome and well-established. There were stunning stable blocks and outbuildings on a substantial parcel of enviably idyllic land. When Merrill Blackburn had seen the prepossessing red-bricked farmhouse Marden Hall for the very first time, she had turned around to her husband Matt and said, "We can't possibly afford this." Her husband had taken her hand in his and given it a reassuring squeeze. "I don't care if we can't afford this place," he said. "Come hell or high water, we're still going to buy it, even if I have to beg, borrow and steal." And buy it they did, because some things Merrill would always say are just meant to be, and are literally written in the stars. By all accounts, in the very beginning, buying the property had burnt a huge hole in their finances, but some sacrifices were well worth making, and this was a sacrifice the couple had never regretted, not even for a moment, especially when property prices had soared in value, and farmhouses like Marden Hall were becoming a buyer's dream. It would seem the cosy years they had enjoyed together as a loving, devoted family, and all the good times that they had had at Marden Hall, had slipped by so fast, and now her daughter Frida was leaving home. It felt as if her life, as she had known it, was being thrown under the bus. She was going to have to rebuild her life all over again, like a kid with its Lego blocks, one brick at a time. Merrill knew that every parent experienced this empty nest syndrome, some so much worse than others, and she was the kind of parent that was not going to take this dramatic transition terribly well. She had friends who couldn't wait for their kids to leave home, but she had moulded her life to fit around her daughter's extracurricular activities, her daughter's lacrosse and drama classes that she'd enjoyed growing up. But now, without Frida around, she'd be forced to rediscover her own identity again. Over the years, Merrill had lost herself a little along the way, when her focus had been devoted entirely on her daughter. She ambled over rather reluctantly to the front door, with the enthusiasm that someone might have if they were about to have an appointment with their dentist to have their teeth extracted. She opened it gingerly, as if she could will away the person standing on the other side of the door, and stood in the doorway, wilfully blocking the entrance. "Oh, there you are, Mrs. Blackburn," said Cindy, with an expression of expectation on her face. "If I didn't know any better, Mrs. Blackburn, I would say you're not terribly thrilled to see me." Merrill let out a mock laugh. "Don't be ridiculous, Cindy. Where on earth did you get that mad idea from? Of course I'm thrilled to see you. And you're very prompt as usual. You're never late, are you, dear?" "Well, if that's the case, Mrs. Blackburn, are you going to let me in and stop blocking the doorway? I'm sure Frida needs a hand with her luggage up there, and knowing Frida, she's probably packed everything apart from the kitchen sink. Only because the kitchen sink is too cumbersome to fit into her luggage," she chuckled. Merrill did not laugh at Cindy's joke, but politely stepped away to let her into the foyer. Cindy glanced up at the staircase and frowned. "Please don't tell me Frida is running late. It's so typical of her. We've got a 22-hour journey ahead of us, and we better get moving." "I heard your sarky comments, Cindy. I may be upstairs, but I'm not mute, you know." "I'm coming. Give me a moment, will you?" came a voice from the top of the stairs. "And don't you dare go without me, Cindy, or I'll personally kill you." Cindy laughed. "Chance will be a fine thing. With you in the car, I won't need a radio. You'll be gassing all the way to Boston, knowing you. I won't be able to shut you up." Frida made a face. "You're so cheeky, Cindy. What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I won't need coffee to keep me awake during our drive, 'cause I've got you, haven't I? You'll be the caffeine I need on the journey." Frida chuckled as she clambered clumsily down the staircase, clattering her suitcase behind her with an ungainly stagger. The battered suitcase thundered down each step until it finally crashed rather laboriously on the lower landing, without miraculously bursting open. It was so typical of Frida to treat all her worldly possessions as roughly as a football you thrashed around the field. Sometimes Frida could be like a bull in a china shop, and many a precious family heirloom had been broken by Frida's abject clumsiness. But Merrill would not have changed her daughter's quirky idiosyncratic habits for all the tea in China. The family golden retriever, Mr. Dogood, was bounding around the place like a fox tearing after a rabbit, wagging his tail furiously and thrashing it around everywhere. He could sense the excitable, charged energy in the house, the mishmash of emotions from Merrill's despair to Frida's excitement was all picked up by the retriever. Several of Frida's suitcases stood in the entrance hall, looking as miserable and forsaken to Merrill as the sequestered lonely gravestones in a cemetery gathering moss and lichen. Cindy began to drag them out one by one to the trunk of her car, where they were being carefully arranged so that everything fit perfectly, as Cindy liked everything to be perfect, much like Mr. Blackburn. Frida, on the other hand, would throw everything into the trunk if given the chance, and just hoped it fitted. Merrill stared at her daughter, as if viewing her for the very first time through a stranger's eyes. Her daughter had grown so much over the years. What had happened to the little girl with the tumble of cute buoyant blonde curls, the chubby face with the dimples, the inquiring blue eyes that were always questioning everything, the little girl that had made her heart melt like chocolate all those years ago? She was now a young lady, with her short blonde ponytail bouncing behind her as she walked, her angular features and a scattering of freckles across the nose that she had inherited from Merrill. "Right, we're all done and dusted, ready to go," said Cindy, straightening her back, once the truck had been fastidiously packed. Frida looked at her mother sadly. "Mum, we're going to go. We've got a long journey ahead of us, I'm afraid." "But of course you must go, my dear. Who am I to stop you? But you must drive very safely, and phone me when you do get to Boston. I need to know you arrived safe and well." "You worry too much, Mum. I'll be fine, I promise, and the journey's pretty straightforward. It might be long, but it's relatively easy." Merrill wanted to grab Frida as quickly as she could and throw her into the house like a hamster that had escaped its cage, so that she didn't go to Boston and leave her alone at Marden Hall on her own. But instead, Meryl stood there very stoically, her legs like concrete blocks completely anchored to one spot. Her eyes began to mist over with tears, which she fought back with a steely determination. She didn't want Frida to see how it tore her apart, to see her go. As a mother, she was expected to hold the fort. She couldn't fall apart in front of her own daughter. "Oh, Mum, look at you," said Frida, throwing her arm around her mother affectionately. "Don't look so dreadfully miserable. Goodness gracious me! I'm just going to Boston. I'm not going to the other end of the world, am I? You'll see me again, and you'll probably want to kick me out when I return. I'll be back, you know. I'm not leaving for good. So please don't look so pained. You make me feel bad about leaving." "But you are leaving," a voice whispered into Meryl's mind. "I know how it works. I did it myself when I was your age. I left home, went to college, and got married. And you'll do much the same, Frida. I know you will. Deny it all you like, but that is how the cookie crumbles." Of course, Frida didn't hear a word that she was thinking. Meryl held her daughter tightly in her arms, as if she was afraid to let her go. Finally her daughter pulled away, and Meryl watched her reluctantly climb into the passenger side seat of Cindy's white Honda Civic, with an apologetic expression on her face. "Goodbye, Mrs. Blackburn," said Cindy. "Don't look so worried. I'll keep an eye on your daughter. I won't let her do anything mischievous, I promise you." "I'll hold you to that, dear," said Meryl with a watery smile. "I hope the two of you will not party too much, like I did when I was at university. You both need to focus on your studies. And don't forget, Cindy, I'd like to remind you on your mother's behalf, you've got a scholarship, so you need to work twice as hard as my daughter." "You're right, Mrs. Blackburn," said Cindy soberly. Meryl nodded. "Good, I'm glad to hear it." Her throat was dry and scratchy as Cindy started up the engine, sounded her horn, and drove down the driveway until they were all gone and were like a faint blur on the horizon. Mr. Dogood stood by Meryl's side, the ever-devoted bundle of cream fur that would never ever leave her. He faithfully sat on his haunches, staring up at Meryl through his dark, soulful eyes that seemed to commiserate with her melancholia. Meryl dropped down onto the red brick driveway like an autumn leaf, and drew Mr. Dogood lovingly into her arms, burying her face into his silky, creamy fur. "Oh, she's gone, Mr. Dogood," she told her dog tenderly. "My daughter's gone. And I think she's left home for good, Mr. Dogood, don't you? I very much doubt she's coming back. She'll get married, have children, after she's been to college, and will only come to see me from time to time. It's you and me, Mr. Dogood, against the world." Mr. Dogood let out a couple of low-pitched barks, as if he was agreeing with her. Meryl chewed her lip awkwardly and steadily rose to her feet. She now felt so terribly alone. Her husband was in the hospital performing 3 or 4 surgeries. He hadn't managed to see off their daughter to university, and so she'd been stranded on her own, having to deal with the incredible loneliness she felt in the aftermath of her daughter's departure, that swept over her like a monsoon wind. Meryl knew what she needed to do. It was what she did every time in her life when she felt that loathsome sense of despair. Before long she'd saddled up her horse Cappuccino, and with Dogood bounding behind her, the 3 of them had gone for a ride down a local riding trail, where autumn leaves seemed to cascade along the paths like golden confetti. A cool breeze nuzzled her cheeks as Meryl trotted down the country paths, swaddled by trees on every side. A gentle sunlight trickled through the boughs of the trees and kissed her cheeks, but Meryl did not remember that ride. Her mind was so far away with her daughter. What she did remember, though, with a crystal-clear clarity, was the ominous knock of the cast-iron knocker of the front door when she'd returned home after her ride, and was bustling busily around her kitchen, making coffee for herself, as she decided she needed some caffeine to cast her out of her downcast state. The kitchen had begun to smell of coffee beans, along with a comforting scent of almonds from the croissant she was warming in the oven, and she could feel her abandoned appetite sweeping back when she realized how hungry she was. "Damn," she said under her breath, "I don't need visitors now. Whoever you are, just go away. Leave me alone, will you?" But the knocking persisted. so Merrill removed her croissant from the oven and reluctantly abandoned her coffee. Mr. Dogood rambunctiously darted over to the front door, barking excitedly, wagging his tail, pacing up and down, as if restless because Merrill was taking her time to get to the door. She did not know who would be paying her a visit this early in the morning. Merrill did not recognize the strange man standing in the doorway, with his short-cropped hazel-brown hair, sallow complexion, brown eyes and navy blue suit. The stranger was built like a wrestler. His large biceps were practically bulging out of his suit, rather inappropriately. "I'm Detective Eric Wilder, with the Chattahoochee Sheriff's Office," he told her. "I'm looking for Matt Blackburn, please." "Matt is my husband, Detective, but he's not here," said Merrill gingerly. "Can I help you, by any chance?" "Do you know where I can find Mr. Blackburn?" said the detective, staring at Merrill, with a steely look in his eyes. "Well, he's had surgery this morning, Detective. 2 or 3, possibly. He works with the hospital, you know. He might be in his office right now. If you're lucky, you'll catch him. What is this about, Detective Wilder, if you don't mind my asking you?" "Did you know of a young man called Adam McFreese, Mrs. Blackburn? Did your husband, Matt, ever mention such a name to you in passing, I wonder?" Merrill looked confounded for a moment. She had heard that name before. It rang a bell in her head, but she couldn't exactly remember where she remembered that name from. "His name rings a bell, Detective, but I can't remember hearing it very recently. I can't place it exactly, but I've always been a bummer with names, I'm afraid. Should I know this person that you're speaking of?" "I understand he was your husband's very best friend, when your husband was in college." "Oh, yes, I do remember, Detective Wilder. Silly me. You must forgive me. I have a memory of a sieve sometimes. My husband, Matt, is always complaining about it. Unfortunately, my daughter is as scatty as I am, I'll have you know. 2 peas in a pod we are. Now let me think. Adam McFreese. Yes, he didn't disappear on a camping trip over 25 years ago, did he not? My husband told me that 5 of his male friends, all who were medical students at the time, were camping. They woke up in the morning to find that Adam McFreese had vanished into thin air. No one knew what became of him. The boys were questioned by the police at the time, and my husband Matt was a suspect because they were the very best of friends. But why, after all this time, are you bringing it up again, Detective? I thought they established that something had happened to Matt and they didn't know what it was and were acceptant of that. No one knew what became of him. Some suggested he might have been killed by a wild animal or even abducted by a stranger." "Your husband was a suspect in Adam McFreese's disappearance, Mrs. Blackburn. For very good reason, I'll have you know. I'm sure he must have told you all about the case in your marriage." "Yes, he did, Detective, absolutely. I know everything. My husband tells me it all. We don't keep secrets from each other. It is dreadfully sad and tragic that Adam McFreese disappeared in the way that he did all those years ago. But I assure you, Detective Wilder, he had nothing to do with the disappearance of that young man. But is there something I should know, Detective? Because why are you here?" "It's not my place to say, Mrs. Blackburn. But as I said, thank you very much for your time. Maybe you should ask your husband about Tara Hewitt. I wonder if you know about her. I get the feeling he's not being completely forthright with you about that woman. But I'm sure he has his good reasons. Thank you for your help, Mrs. Blackburn. I'll see myself out, shall I?" Merrill watched the detective leaving her property, her heart heavy. She wondered why on this day when her daughter had left home for college, that a detective was now seeking her husband out, concerning a missing persons case that occurred over 25 long years ago. Could this day get any worse? And why was this Detective Wilder now looking into this old case? Why was he so interested in her husband all of a sudden? She thought her husband's name had been cleared a long time ago. Now it seemed he was a suspect again. But why? This was proving to be an unpleasant day that was leaving a sour, bittersweet taste in her mouth. Meryl tried to remember what her husband had told her about his best friend Adam all those years ago. It was almost as if she was rolling back a tape recorder to when they first began dating. She had been 23 years old at the time. She remembered they'd been to a steak restaurant, eating delicious steaks together, served with blue cheese sauce, mashed potatoes and spinach. Matt had told her an extraordinarily provocative story that had shaken her to her core. They'd both been asking each other questions about the worst thing that had happened in their lives, as they had grown closer and wanted to know everything about each other, as couples invariably do. She had shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly, sawing into her steak with her sharp knife, chewing the tender, succulent meat that just melted into her mouth like butter. "You want to know about the worst day of my life, do you?" she had asked Matt tentatively. "I remember it as if it happened yesterday, even though I was terribly young at the time. For me it was the day my grandfather died. Well, his funeral, actually," she had told Matt, puckering up her brow in a painful recall. "It was such a tough time for us all, you know," she said. "I was very close to my grandfather, so when he died I didn't handle it terribly well. There was an open casket at his funeral, you know, which was possibly a bad idea. My grandfather looked incredibly peaceful. He looked like he was sleeping. I remember being angry with people for lying to me, most especially my parents. Why did they say he was dead when he was sleeping? He wasn't dead, I thought. Why wasn't anybody bothering to wake him up? I was 8 years old at the time, so I tried to wake up my grandfather, refusing to believe he was dead. I climbed into the casket, cuddled up to my grandfather, and upset quite a lot of people at that funeral by my actions. I embarrassed my parents most dreadfully. They kept telling me to get out of the casket, and I wouldn't listen. 'Your grandfather is dead,' my mother told me. 'Stop embarrassing us, Meryl. Everybody is looking at you. You're making a fool out of us.' My parents have always been stiff upper-lip people, you know. My behaviour aggrieved them most greatly. I was sobbing inconsolably, saying, 'Why won't someone wake him up?' I guess I refused to accept he was dead. I think I was dragged away, kicking and screaming. Someone gave me a sedative to calm me down, but it took me a long time to accept my grandfather's death. My parents were furious with me for climbing into that casket, but years later they saw the funny side of everything. I think being that much older, it amused them more." Matt had reached out to Meryl, squeezing her hand. "Sorry, I didn't mean to make you recall such a wretched event." "It's all right," Meryl had said. "So what was your worst day?" Matt had sighed loudly, wiping his mouth with a starched linen napkin, and swigging back a large gulp of red wine. "It was not just one day. It was a few days, actually. It was when I became a lead suspect in a missing persons investigation. The police interrogated all 4 of us. We were medical students. We had been on a camping weekend. One of the boys went missing. I was the one that piqued their interest and curiosity, because the young man that went missing was my very best friend." Meryl's eyes had grown as wide as saucers, as she stared at Matt incredulously. "You were a suspect in a missing persons investigation? That is crazy. Why?" she had asked, her eyes remaining focused on Matt. Matt took another swig of his wine. "This is good stuff, it is. It's always worthwhile ordering an expensive wine. It tastes very good. I can taste the woody notes in this." Meryl noticed his fingers were shaking as he recalled the event. It seemed to distress him a lot, and she realized that this had not been an easy time in Matt's life, and her heart leapt out to him, as if she wanted to comfort him. "You don't have to tell me, Matt, if you don't want to. I can see the subject distresses you greatly. I can't imagine the stress of being a suspect in a missing persons investigation, and what it must feel like to be cast under a cloud or shadow of suspicion. When it is clear to me, you couldn't harm a fly even if you wanted to." "Oh, but I do, Meryl. I need to share this story with you, because you are going to be my wife one day, and I don't want to start our relationship by keeping any secrets from you." "You think I'm going to be your wife one day?" Meryl had asked, confounded. "Isn't that a little bit presumptuous of you, Matt Blackburn?" "Is it?" he'd asked. "Is it presumptuous to know what feels right?" Merrill had been taken aback by Matt's fortuitous comments. He was declaring it as a fact that they would one day be married, as if it was already preordained and written in the stars, to such an extent that Merrill actually believed that they would be married, because Matt Blackburn was so certain about it. She liked the way the successful surgeon approached life with such certainty and conviction, knowing exactly what he wanted, and pursuing his ambitious goals, never even for a moment being intimidated by insurmountable odds that could potentially be stacked up against him, or engaging in even a brief measure of doubt. Isn't that how we should all approach our lives, without worrying how we will ultimately achieve our goals, but believing that we will achieve them regardless? When Matt had purchased Marden Hall for the couple, shortly after they were married, he had been resolutely determined to buy the property, despite the daunting cost of the place, that they could ill afford at the time, but against all the odds he had masterfully accomplished his goal, as he always did, and made it happen, as if he'd hit that perfect hole-in-one on the golf course, and never ever looked back. Ostensibly, in the surgical theatre where Matt Blackburn operated on his patients, he used the same measure of certainty, always believing in a successful outcome in all his procedures, even when some of the challenges he faced were more than a little overwhelming. So he was an excellent surgeon with a very steady hand that was much loved by his grateful patients and admired by the medical establishment. He was responsible for inviting medical students into his surgery to learn from his skillful mastery. Merrill, whom had always been a little flighty, like a nervous bird flying away at the first sign of a cat ferreting around the yard, found being married to Matt had grounded her, tethering her to her life like a boat safely anchored into its mooring spot. Matt, who was so sure of himself, confident without being cocky, self-assured without being arrogant, assertive without being pushy, had always made her feel safe, and that's one of the things she loved about her husband most. Where she doubted, he believed, and when she was anxious about something, his confidence that was always unfailing would win her over. He was like the antiseptic ointment to all her bumps and bruises that she had acquired in life. He eased them all away, so they were a perfect couple in every sense of the word. "Go on," Merrill had said to Matt, taking a big bite of her juicy steak, chewing it slowly to savour all the buttery, peppery flavours that melted in her mouth. "This steak is delicious, Matt. Now you must tell me, why did the police suspect that you had anything to do with Adam McFreese's disappearance? That's insane. I only have to look at you to know that you are a very good man, Matt Blackburn. But clearly the police echo my sentiments, as you would not be enjoying this delicious steak dinner with me otherwise, would you? They obviously have no evidence against you. And even if Adam McFreese was your best friend, it certainly doesn't mean you had anything to do with his disappearance, does it?" "I appreciate your faith in me, Merrill," said Matt. "Let's just say it's complicated. A day before my best friend Adam McFreese vanished, I was seen threatening him. I told him I would kill him if he went anywhere near Tara Hewitt. Unfortunately, Tara wantonly cheated on me with Adam. I didn't take it at all well, I'm afraid. I was furious, absolutely furious, incandescent with rage I was. At the time, Adam and I shared a student digs together, with 4 other girls. One of the girls never liked me. Her name was Angie. She told the police about my heated altercation with Adam McFreese, how I'd threatened to kill the man. But I'd been venting, letting off steam like you do. I mean, you can tell someone you want to kill them, without actually meaning it. But if a couple of days later the person in question that you threatened goes missing, it certainly does not look good. I can assure you Adam used similar words on me when I fired him up. It is what we would do. And he knew my words meant nothing, but she was quite the stirrer, she was. It wasn't uncommon for Adam and me to have disputes, but we always made up in the end. We were very, very good friends, as close as brothers we were. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think of Adam. I was devastated by his disappearance. The police falsely assumed that out of a jealous rage, I had brazenly killed my best friend so that he would not impose a threat on my relationship with Tara Hewitt, that by that stage had already fallen apart. They implied I wanted him out of the way, and willfully disposed of his body when I went camping with him and 3 other medical students. I mean, have you ever heard anything so mindlessly ridiculous in all your life? The police were so predictable, believing the very worst of me, insisting that I definitely had something to hide. I told them I liked Tara a lot, but that my friendship with Adam McFreese, that went way back, was significantly more important than my relationship with Tara. Yes, she was a pretty girl. Yes, I was fond of her. Yes, I liked her a lot. But Adam and I were best friends since I'd been knee-high to a grasshopper. He was like a brother to me. And at the end of the day, neither of us would let a girl come between us. We even made a pact once about that a long time ago. We both agreed, if we ever liked the same girl, we would literally leave that girl well alone and not pursue any relationship with her, out of respect for each other. I remember Adam telling me that Tara was not his type. He liked her sense of humour. So our little dispute was like water under the bridge to us. But the police did not see it like that. At the time, they were grasping at straws, asking me to tell them what I had done to Adam McFreese. I want to tell you the detectives interviewing me were like dogs with bones, determined to get a confession out of me. Do you know, I never used to understand how some people would confess to crimes they did not commit. Now I know why it can happen. It is exhausting being hounded by the police. It is almost easier to say, yes, I did it. Now please leave me alone. You're giving me a headache. At the time, my father got me a lawyer. A very good one at that. Michelle Diker was her name. That woman was formidable. The detectives were intimidated by her. She wasn't called the Rottweiler for nothing. She could bite, that was for sure. She told them that they couldn't question me any further, and they promptly shut up. Their interrogations were shut down. But it was a very difficult time for me. I genuinely thought I'd end up being locked away for life, for something I never did. And believe me, I guarantee it happens more times than we care to imagine. But one of the police detectives told me my body language was not like that of a guilty man. He believed in my innocence at least. So you're telling me, Matt, that one of the detectives really believed that you murdered Adam McFreese? That's crazy, said Merrill. Matt nodded sadly. I'm afraid so. He thinks I might have had a brawl with Adam, and either accidentally or intentionally have killed him, and guilefully disposed of his body. Of course, the lake on the campground was searched by divers, but Adam's body was never found. So without a body, the police didn't have any solid evidence. So no one knew exactly what had become of him. So what do you think happened to your friend Adam, Matt? Do you think a stranger, possibly staying near the campground, abducted him during the night? Or what about a wild animal, like a mountain lion, or an animal like that, a bear even, that could have snatched him potentially? Anything is possible, is it not? There are so many missing people that disappear all over America every year, especially in national parks, and no one has any idea what became of them. Matt Blackburn's brow furrowed. That's the $101 question, Merrill. I have no idea what became of Adam McFreese. We had a very pleasant night camping. The following morning, Adam had vanished into thin air. No one saw what became of him. 5 of us medical students had been camping very happily together on a camping ground overlooking a magnificently large lake bursting with fish. close to the Chattahoochee National Forest, which is east of the Mississippi River. Just so you know, the forest spans 750,000 acres of mountainous terrain in North Georgia. It's spectacular, wild and rugged, everything you could want for a camping trip. We were all having the time of our lives, looking for an escape where we could drink beers together, go fishing, and barbecue over a fire pit. We'd been planning the trip for quite some time, and were looking extremely forward to it. Adam and I shared a tent together. The other 3 men shared another tent. Our tents were next to each other, and alongside the 2 trucks we had driven to the campground. It had been such a beautiful, peaceful trip. We were camped by this lake, surrounded by a plethora of trees. It was idyllic, and the next morning Adam mysteriously vanished. That is incredibly weird. I wonder what did become of Adam McFreeze. It's an extraordinary story, it really is. I mean, people don't disappear off the face of the earth, do they, without explanation? But they appear to, because if you look at all those 411 cases, no one ever knows what became of all those people. I suppose I can kind of understand why the police would focus their attention on you, given your fallout with Adam over a girlfriend. But I absolutely know they were barking up the wrong tree there. Matt nodded. They sure were. Even my friends on the trip assured the police we were no longer fighting anymore. I had been talking about breaking up with Tara Hewitt before Adam even got involved with her. I was beginning to think that we didn't have much in common, but the detective did not listen to any of that. I remember after my interview with the police, this one detective that was laying into me unreasonably hard was looking at me and saying, "One day we'll find out the truth, Matt Blackburn, and then we'll lock you away in prison and throw away the key. You won't get away with this, young man. The truth will come out in the end. It has a nasty way of showing up when you least suspect it. So this isn't over, Matt, by a long shot. You're going to need to watch your back from now on." Meryl grimaced as she reflected over what her husband Matt had told her about Adam McFreeze's disappearance all those long years ago. And lo and behold, a detective now wanted to speak to him again about the case after all this time. She had a horrifying, unsettling feeling in her gut that this case was not going to go away any time soon, and that the past was being excavated, rather like an ancient piece of pottery after an archaeological dig, which could mean only one thing: some new evidence had come to light, or something to draw attention to this case. Or it could be that the police were going over old case files in order to make a conviction by re-interviewing everyone that was around at the time of Adam's disappearance, and checking to see if their statements still aligned after all these years. Matt had returned home later that evening. He had missed dinner, but that was not a surprise, as he was often called in for emergency surgeries, or sometimes saw patients after hours. But normally he would breeze in after a day at work, looking as fresh as he did when he first left the house. Meryl had envied her husband doing a job that he loved so much, that paid their bills, and gifted his life with so much purpose. It had made her realize that she needed to find something more meaningful to do with her life, and now that her daughter Frida had left for college in Boston, if she didn't find something purposeful to do, she'd go out of her mind with boredom. She had happily given up her career when she'd married her husband Matt to take care of their daughter Frida, something she had never regretted for a single moment. But after Frida had left for college earlier on in the day, Malden Hall suddenly seemed alarmingly empty. This evening, when he entered the house, Matt, who always was well presented and took great pride in his appearance, looked like something manky that the cat had dragged in, that was only half alive. There were dark smudges under his eyes that shadowed his face, and he looked bruised and deflated. Meryl noticed he hadn't even bothered to change out of his light blue scrubs, and in his scruffy, bedraggled state she knew something was amiss. She didn't have to guess why her husband's feathers were so ruffled. No doubt the detective whom arrived at her door earlier in the morning had made his unwelcome presence known at the surgery, and had likely set the cat among the pigeons. Worse still, what must the medical professionals and nursing staff have lightly thought about the fortuitous arrival of a detective seeking Matt Blackburn out, who was a respected orthopedic surgeon, to take him in for questioning? It wasn't a good look, and she could only imagine the idle rumours, wild speculation, probably circulating around frenziedly at the hospital like an unwelcome smell. "You must be starving, sweetheart," Meryl had said to her husband, unable to hide the concern in her voice. "I tell you what, how about I rustle you up some of that baked ham with potato salad?" "I'm not hungry," Matt said, folding Meryl lovingly into his arms and giving her a tight, lingering hug, like a fragile small boy hanging on to his mother for dear life. "The police came over to the house today," said Meryl tentatively. "A detective seems to be asking questions about Adam McFreese's vanishing. Would you believe it? They're actually unearthing the old case again after all these years. It's so ridiculous, honestly. Have they not got better things to do with their time? It's completely insane." Meryl's husband shrugged his shoulders and meandered across the kitchen floor towards the large upright refrigerator, which wobbled precariously as he threw open the door abruptly, pulling out a large bottle of half-opened Sauvignon Blanc, and poured himself a large crystal goblet of wine. "I know. The detective paid me a call. He asked me a whole lot of questions." Meryl studied her husband as his hand began to shake violently. One thing she admired about Matt was his sturdy hand, which was a prerequisite for a surgeon, but tonight his hand was wobbling and shaking like someone with Parkinson's disease. She watched her husband drink back the wine like Kool-Aid and waved a precautionary hand in the air. "Don't drink too much, sweetheart. You've got surgery in the morning. You're going to have to operate on patients. You can't afford to drink." I know, her husband said obsequiously, "but I need to calm down. I've had quite a day today. A terrible, terrible day. Would you believe it? The police have found remains, human remains, on the camping ground, about half a mile away from where we pitched our tents on that weekend 25 years ago. Can you bloody believe it? I need all this like I need a hole in my head." Meryl inhaled sharply, her body freezing with fear. "You saying they found human remains? I mean, how is that possible after all this time if it is Adam? I mean, surely there'd be nothing left of the body. You are joking, are you not?" "I wish I was. I know finding the body will bring closure to Adam's family. What there is left of it, of course, and for that I'm very glad. But for the four of us camping on that campground, it invariably opens up a whole can of worms and places a cloud of suspicion over all of us, most especially me, given that dispute I had over that girlfriend of mine, Tara Hewitt. The police have affirmed that the remains did belong to Adam McFreese, so they're going to interrogate all four of us that were camping together that weekend. So it looks like we have some rosy times ahead of us." Meryl shook her head sorrowfully as she tried to assimilate the information that was clawing away in her guts. They did not need this intrusive interference in their lives. Why did all this stuff have to resurface again after all these years, like a landfill site being dug up? "The police have found Adam McFreese's body after all this time," she repeated. "But how can this be?" As if reading her thoughts, Adam said, "I'm afraid the campground is building a bathroom and shower facility. And lo and behold, the construction crew unearthed the bones of Adam McFreese. He had been buried in a shallow grave. His bones were badly decomposed, but they used dental records to identify him. The police believe he was murdered and have evidence to prove his death was no accident. So they've been sniffing around me like a cadaver dog over a dead corpse, let's say, asking all kinds of questions. I didn't tell you this, but they took me into the station and were hurling all kinds of accusations at me about how angry I was with Adam McFreese and his so-called interest in my girlfriend at the time, Tara Hewitt. How I wanted to extract my revenge on him because he was interested in Tara. I told him they were talking baloney and that I was beginning to have doubts about my relationship with Tara in the first place. But I might as well have been talking to a brick wall. They have their own preconceived ideas about what happened.
So they're going over the same ground again? Asked Merrill. This is a nightmare. Do you think they're suspicious of you?
Did you listen to a word I said, sweetheart? Or are you completely mute? Of course they're suspicious of me. I told you I'm their lead suspect in this investigation. They cannot fathom how 4 of us could have been camping together and not heard a thing during the night. I assured them that we went to bed quite bladdered that night. We didn't hear anything as a result. The speculation was that Adam might have met a deadly fate with a wild animal. But now that his deceased body has been unearthed, the police are looking at me again. So I've organized a lawyer, a man called Robert Baxter. He soon shut the police up. He's a formidable lawyer, but they're not going to let this go, Merrill. That inspector is hungry to make an arrest. I could feel it in my bones, and the way he was looking at me. It was like one of those vultures hovering over a deceased animal, waiting to shred it apart. The man is convinced I killed my best friend.
Merrill stared at her husband incredulously, unable to move or even breathe. She couldn't believe how when she got up in the morning, the worst thing she had to face was her daughter leaving home. But now her husband could potentially be arrested for a murder he had not committed, and Merrill knew her husband could never have harmed a fly. But the police would never listen. They wanted to solve crimes, even if it meant arresting the wrong person. And she had to help her husband in any way she could, and she would stop at nothing to find answers, even if it killed her. The following morning, when Merrill climbed out of bed, she felt as if someone had slammed a pickaxe into her head. She had a thunderous headache, brought on by the stress of the last 24 hours. She sat up bolt upright, realizing that Mr. Dogood was lying at her feet, on the large king-size bed. Normally the dog was relegated to the basket in the far corner of the bedroom, but today he was welcome on her bed. She needed his comforting presence. She reached out to stroke his soft fur, noticing that prisms of sunlight danced through a little crack in the curtain. She could see specks of dust caught up in the light. She realized her husband was long gone. The house suddenly seemed vacuously empty. She pulled out a packet of pills from a drawer in her bedside table, knocking back a couple of Tylenol at the back of her throat with a tumbler of water that rested on the nightstand. She'd love nothing better in the world than to crawl under her duvet covers and hide from the day, so that this dreadful nightmare could be willfully washed away by the ocean currents of her dreams. But she knew she needed to drag herself out of bed to get the day finally started. There was no way her husband was going to be falsely accused of something he had not done, which could potentially be a very real possibility. She'd heard enough about people who'd spent years in prison when they were innocent of the crime that they'd been falsely accused of committing. She'd be damned if that was going to happen to her husband. She had lost her daughter to college in Boston. She did not want to lose her husband to a life spent in prison behind bars. Merrill knew what she needed to do. She needed to nip this in the bud right now, before things got out of hand. Merrill's cell phone was flashing with messages from her daughter that she briefly scanned. "Hi, Mum! Arrived in Boston. Everything's great. We drove non-stop, barely any breaks along the way. Absolutely exhausted. Speak to you soon when I've recovered. Love you, Mum. Hope you're not too worried about us." Right now, Frida was the last concern on Merrill's mind. "I've got to get moving," she told Mr. Dogood, who stared at her through his black eyes and woofed a couple of times as if to say, "What are you waiting for?" Merrill didn't take much pride in her appearance that morning,
What she looked like was the least of her concerns. She threw on a pair of black pants and a black cashmere sweater, along with a pair of short low-heeled boots with a silver buckle and a string of pearls to complete the look. She stared at her pale complexion in the mirror and realized that she looked almost as pitiful and pathetic as her husband did. If she thought her husband looked a sorry sight last night, she was not doing much better herself. The weight of her worry had sucked the colour out of her skin, and the vacant, haunted face that stared back at her in the bathroom mirror was one she barely recognized at all. No amount of makeup would lightly conceal the black circles of worry under her eyes, and a large pimple that had manifested in the middle of her chin overnight. Like a lonely island. Meryl had not had a pimple in many years, since she was a teenager, but this nasty red, angry pustule seemed determined to be as conspicuous as possible. It was an ugly thing, mirroring the ugly misfortune of recent events. Meryl tried to make herself look halfway decent by putting some lipstick on her lips, but it did little to glamorize her pinched, vacuous look, but seemed only to accentuate the ruddiness of her ashen complexion. She ran a brush swiftly through her long brown hair, that seemed particularly tangled today, almost as if everything she touched was conspiring against her, to make her life as difficult as possible. Meryl trudged down the long creaking staircase, with her purse in her hands, and Mr. Dogood bounding ebulliently at her side. He was watching her every move, with a look of concern on his face, as if he knew his owner was going through the dark night of the soul, and he had great empathy for her, reaching out with a paw to console her, as if sensing her grievous melancholia. Meryl proceeded to bang around her large kitchen, rather clumsily. It seemed such a mission just to make coffee for herself this morning. Everything took superhuman effort, while she contemplated what she was going to do. The coffee scalded her tongue, burning the insides of her mouth, as she drank it piping hot, far too fast, without giving it time to cool down, as such was her haste to get her day started. She'd go and visit Chancellor Miller, who was a cosmetic surgeon, dealing with a wealthy clientele, intent on improving their appearances, with a nip here and a tuck there. She needed to speak to all the men that were camping that night with her husband. They must remember something that could persuade the police that her husband, Matt, had absolutely nothing to do with the death of Adam McFreese. When she arrived at the surgery consulting rooms, with its elegant marble floors and upholstered front desk, there was an elegant young woman in reception, with blonde hair pulled away from her face in a glamorous bun. The woman was impeccably dressed, wearing a very smart suit, without a single hair out of place. The woman eyed Meryl with the same kind of disapproval you would if your cat vomited over the couch. She gave Meryl the once-over, with an abrasive look in her cold, hard brown eyes. She looked like the kind of woman who had grown up self-entitled and had little empathy for anyone beyond herself. She scowled at Meryl, her eyes focusing on the big pimple in the middle of her chin, with an expression of abject disgust on her face, as if Meryl had some kind of leprosy that she didn't want to catch. "Yes," she snapped brusquely. "How can I help you?" "I'm here to see Dr. Miller," said Meryl. "I must see him now as a matter of urgency." "And who are you?" asked the woman impertinently, with her perfectly tattooed eyebrows twitching like a pair of cat whiskers. "I'm Dr. Blackburn's wife, Meryl. It's very important that I speak to him now." The woman annoyingly began to tap her long, elegant pink fingernails on the counter, almost as if she was playing the piano. "I'm sorry," she said, with a smug, self-satisfied expression on her face, "but Dr. Miller is booked up today. He can't possibly see you now, I'm afraid. So if you want to book a consultation, you should have booked an appointment weeks ago," she said pointedly. "Dr. Miller is a sought-after surgeon. You're going to have to wait until he's got a spare opening in his diary. I'll take down your details and be in touch. What is your contact number?" she asked. Meryl didn't need the young woman putting obstacles in her path, like those orange and white plastic cones that the police use on the highway to slow down the traffic, so she did something rather outrageously impulsive that surprised even her.
She bolted past the surprised receptionist, down the passage to a door marked Dr. Chancer Miller. She gently pushed open the door, and for a brief moment she stood there like a stationary waxwork statue, staring in awe at the consultation, with a curious intrigue, almost forgetting for a moment why she'd come to see Chancer in the first place. For a while doctor and patient were caught up in an intense dialogue, and were blindly oblivious to Merrill's presence in the consulting room. Dr. Miller had a selection of breast implants strewn across his walnut desk, from smallest to largest, which he was showing his patient. The woman was bouncing an implant in her hand that was so massive it almost made Merrill faint with astonishment. Were there really some women willing to put water balloons in their body, she wondered in horror. What was the world coming to? The woman looked like she'd been through numerous surgeries. Her skin was as taut as a reptile's, devoid of wrinkles, and her lips were much plumper and fuller than they should have been. There was nothing natural about her physical appearance, and everything about her reeked of privilege and money, from the skin-tight leopard-print catsuit she was wearing, to the determined, spoilt, petulant look on her face. Merrill could almost imagine this woman as a child, stamping her foot while her parents ran around her, giving in to her every whim, saying, "Yes, dear, of course, dear, anything you want, dear." Merrill imagined her husband was much the same, for it would seem this was the kind of woman you didn't say no to. And it was likely that Dr. Miller was having a tough time making the woman see sense, as if he was wading with her in a pond full of tumbleweeds. "I want to go as big as possible, Dr. Miller," the woman snapped indignantly. "Why are you not listening to me, doctor? If you won't do the surgery, I'll go to someone else. I hear Dr. Ernest Rodriguez has an excellent reputation. I could always go to him. A friend of mine did, and she's very satisfied with the results. I told you I like these large implants," she said, bouncing the oversized implant in her hand possessively. "I like these ones. This is going to give me an incredible cleavage, and my husband is going to absolutely love it." Dr. Miller frowned. "I'm giving you honest advice, Mrs. Frieseman. I really am. You're not a very big woman, nor are you getting any younger. A very large breast implant like this is going to make you look comical, like a caricature in a cartoon. Do you really want that? You don't want people to know you've had surgery. I like my surgeries to look au naturel, that even your husband will not notice you've had work done on yourself. Less is definitely more, Mrs. Frieseman. I cannot stress that strongly enough. I've been doing surgeries for a long time. I know what I'm talking about. If your bust is too big, you might look rather matronly, overweight if you like, and your clothes won't hang on you well. Why do you think Vogue models have no breasts? The designers know this fact. These breast implants will make you look top-heavy, and as you're not a young woman anymore, you might look rather silly. Some people might make fun of you behind your back. Do you really want that? How dare you, Dr. Miller, talk to me as if I don't know what I'm doing? I want the large implants. I'm paying you for the surgery. You've given me your advice, I've listened to it, but I want the large breasts, and I'm not settling for smaller ones. I'm sorry, but I'm not. I have my reputation to consider, Mrs. Frieseman. People will ask you who did your surgery for you, and I will be looked upon as giving you lousy advice, or encouraging you to have a surgery that has not benefited your appearance in any way. All of a sudden, patient and doctor seemed to sense they're not alone in the room, and Dr. Miller looks up to see Merrill standing there, gawking at them, while his receptionist was apologetically standing behind her in the doorway, waving her arm in the air. "I'm sorry, Dr. Miller. I tried to stop her, but this woman just barged past me in reception. I told her you were busy, but she refused to listen. She insisted on seeing you." "Oh, my word. Look what the cat dragged in. Isn't this an amazing surprise?" said Dr. Miller, looking up at Merrill, recognizing her at once. "How are you, Merrill, my dear? It's good to see you. It's been far too long. Do you mind dreadfully if I spend a couple more minutes with my patient? Wait in the reception if you don't mind. I'll see you in a second." "And who on earth might you be?" asked the patient, turning around to examine Merrill through narrowing eyes, visibly scowling at her with a "how dare you" kind of look on her face. "Don't you know it's incredibly rude interrupting us like this? Can you not see I'm having a consultation here with my surgeon? It's incredibly presumptuous of you to just barge in like this. Can you not wait your turn like any normal person?" "Oh, I do apologize for interrupting. But you know what, Mrs. Frieseman, if that is in fact your name, you're right about those breast implants that you want. They'll look so good on you. In your case, bigger is definitely better. You don't want to skimp on size, do you?" said Merrill, unable to resist the urge to be sarcastic. "See, Dr. Miller, listen to this woman. She agrees with me. Now are you persuaded?" she said, arching her brow with a triumphant look on her face. "Are you going to give me the surgery or not? Or do I have to book an appointment with Dr. Ernest Rodriguez? I like your work, Dr. Miller. I'm going to be completely frank with you. You're an excellent surgeon, and everybody knows that. But if I have to find another surgeon along the way who will do what I want for me, I will." "Very well, Mrs. Frieseman. I give up. We'll do the surgery on you next Wednesday. Remember the rules, no food the night before," said Chancer, waving his arms in the air in a resigned exasperation, as if swatting the patient away like an annoying mosquito. The woman's eyes lit up with delight like a Christmas tree. She purred. "Oh, Dr. Miller," she said coquettishly, "you make me a happy, happy lady. Guess where I'm going now? I'm going to buy myself some sexy new swimming attire to show off my brand new assets," she said buoyantly, breezing past Merrill, balancing rather precariously on her staggeringly high heels. She affectionately patted Merrill on the back, as if they were long-lost old friends or kindred spirits of some kind. "If you're looking for implants, my dear, you're in the very best hands here with Dr. Miller. He's a fine surgeon, you know. But choose the silicone breast implants. They're so much better than the other choices," she said, rolling her eyes. "I know because I've tried them all, in varying sizes, let me tell you. I can see you haven't had work done, dear," she said, looking at Merrill pitifully. "You have a very small chest, but don't you worry, my girl. That will soon be rectified. Dr. Miller can work miracles. Before you know it, you'll have a killer cleavage to die for, because by the looks of things, you've never seen a cleavage a day in your life. But as I say, it's never too late for anyone." "I'll bear that in mind, Mrs. Frieseman," said Merrill. "Good luck with your surgery." She allowed the woman in the catsuit to slink past her out into the reception bay, cooing like a happy camper. Chancer rushed over to Merrill, embracing her magnanimously with a warm hug. They'd always been very good friends. He insisted she took a seat, pointing out a leather chair to her. He told her to make herself comfortable, and Merrill did not hesitate to plunge her fatigued body into that comfortable chair with its luxurious, sumptuous upholstering. "Oh, that woman! Mrs. Frieseman! Oh, she was quite the feisty character, was she not? That woman knows exactly what she wants, and God forbid you don't do what she asks you. You can't say no to a woman like that, you know, Chancer. You certainly have your work cut out for you dealing with patients that are demanding like that. And my husband thought he had a raw deal being an orthopedic surgeon. If he witnessed what happened here moments ago, I think he'd never wish to trade places with you. I can't for the life of me actually fathom that Mrs. Frieseman wants implants so large," said Merrill. "I mean, it's crazy, is it not? She's got a petite frame. It's like building a castle like I did with Lego blocks when I was a child. If you put too many on the top of the building, it all comes crashing down." "Story of my life, I'm afraid," said Chancer. "Some women have really bad body dysmorphia. They believe if their busts are like flotation tanks, they might just be big enough. He chuckled. Anyway, enough about breast implants. It is very good to see you, Meryl. It's been far too long. I think I last saw you at that dinner party in Manhattan. It was about 3 years back, I seem to remember. How are you doing, my dear? How is Matt and your daughter? Now, what's her name? I do apologize. I'm very bad with names. Chloe is always telling me the importance of remembering names, but I am forever forgetting them. I imagine in 3 years your daughter has grown into quite a becoming young lady. What is she doing now?
Oh, Frida, she's fine. Sensible enough not to pursue a medical career, though. She went off to college in Boston yesterday.
Oh, I am sorry, said Chancer sympathetically. I guess that must have hit you hard. Even though we want the best for our kids, it's tough when we see them leave home. But that's not why you came to my surgery this morning. You don't strike me as a woman breaking down doors to get breast implants. So what's up? Is Matt all right?
For a moment Chancer's face dropped.
He is all right, is he not? Don't tell me he's sick.
Of course Matt's not sick. He's absolutely fine, said Meryl. It's nothing like that. But he is in fact the reason I came here to see you this morning. It's a little bit of a delicate subject, I'm afraid, but I need to broach it with you.
Go on,
said Chancer, raising a brow. A Detective Wilder from the Chattahoochee Sheriff's Office came to my home yesterday, wanting to speak to my husband about the disappearance of Adam McFreese. Chancer scratched his head. He was a good-looking surgeon, with a warm olive complexion and green eyes, but his face seemed to pale at the very mention of Adam McFreese's name. He sighed and began to squeeze one of the breast implants on the walnut desk so hard that his knuckles turned white. Meryl suspected it was a self-soothing gesture for him. He said gingerly,
"That's a blast from the past, is it not? I haven't heard Adam McFreese's name mentioned in many years. 25 years, to be exact, since the man disappeared. It's a long time. I thought that was all done and dusted, behind us. So why on earth are the police investigating that case all over again? I thought it was water under the bridge after all this time."
"So did we all. But unfortunately, Chancer, I hate to break this to you, but it seems as if they've found human remains in the camping ground where Adam went missing. They've identified the remains as belonging to Adam McFreese." Chancer seemed to almost shake in the shock of this revelation.
"They've found his body?"
"I'm afraid so," said Meryl, shaking her head. "The police now believe that Adam McFreese was murdered or accidentally killed in a brawl of some kind. They think my husband Matt is involved. They're sniffing around him, Chancer, like a bad smell. And I'm so worried. I think they're looking for any excuse to arrest him. They're trying to make out that Adam and my husband were fighting over a girl called Tara Hewitt, when they'd already settled their differences and had made peace with each other. My husband had realized he had little in common with Tara Hewitt and was intending on ending their relationship, so why would he harm his very best friend over that woman? It makes no sense at all, does it? But the police have tunnel vision as far as my husband is concerned." Dr. Miller chewed his lip uncomfortably, blowing out a breath of air, as if smoking a cigarette.
"What your husband told you is not exactly true. It wasn't like that, really. But I think maybe Matt was being economical with the truth to spare your feelings, Meryl."
"What do you mean?" asked Meryl. "You're not making any sense, Chancer. Please spit it out. I need to hear it all." Chancer uncomfortably began to squeeze a breast implant rather manically. It would have almost been perverse if it hadn't been done so absent-mindedly. It looked as if his mind was 1,000 miles away. It would seem that Meryl's startling revelations had rattled him to the core. He looked decidedly discomposed and on edge, as if someone had hit him across the head thunderously with a baseball bat. And when a call filtered through his office from the reception desk, he pressed down the intercom and snapped at his receptionist rather brusquely.
"Yes, what is it, Rachel? It's Mrs. Fullerstone. She's here for her consultation with you. I'm sorry, Rachel. I need you to cancel all my appointments today. Something urgent has come up. But Mrs. You heard me, Rachel. Yes, Dr. Miller. What shall I say to your patients? Say that, Rachel. I pay you to use your wits, so bloody use them, will you? Even if you have to be creative with the truth, he said tetchily. Sorry about that, Merrill. This has come as a shock to me. Look at me. I'm shaking like a leaf. This whole wretched business being unearthed again. It's not easy to deal with. I must warn the others that we all have to have our story straight, because it's likely we'll be interrogated by the police again, now that remains have been found at the camping site. This is a nightmare. I need this like a hole in the head.
You echo my sentiments exactly, Chancer. But what are you not telling me? What do you mean about my husband being economical with the truth to me?
Chancer gave Merrill an apologetic look. What I mean, Merrill, is the police likely think that Matt had a good motive to harm Adam McFreeze. If you want to know the truth on the camping trip, the tension between the two men you could cut with a knife, which kind of spoilt the trip for the rest of us. I'm actually surprised they both agreed to come, as they'd had a massive fallout with each other over Tara Hewitt. You see, Merrill, your husband had very good reason to be mad with Adam McFreeze, and personally I couldn't blame him. The police know that, I'm most sure.
But I don't understand. That's not what Matt told me.
Well, I think we're all going to have to get our facts ironed out straight when the police interview us, which is invariably going to happen. I'm sure Matt probably did not want to upset you, Merrill, but I'm not going to tell you any lies, because you will find out soon enough. I'm about to tell you that Tara Hewitt and your husband got engaged in college. Your husband was smitten by her, but she broke his heart. I never thought he'd get over her, but when you came along in Matt's life, he returned to his good old self again. You were the best thing that ever happened to him, Merrill.
Engaged? Tara Hewitt was engaged to Matt, gasped Merrill. That can't be right. He never told me that.
Chancer grimaced. It's true, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, Tara Hewitt was nursing a crush over Adam McFreeze, and then the two of them had a one-night stand together, behind your husband's back. Matt was absolutely devastated and furious with Adam when he found out about his fiancée and best friend's betrayal. It hit him brutally hard. Adam insisted it meant nothing, but Matt was outraged over the incident. He did break it off at once with Tara, as Matt hates disloyalty of any kind, as you well know. Let's just say, Adam and Matt, well, I suspect they were still at loggerheads with each other. Your husband obviously felt betrayed by his very best friend. So on that camping trip, they were not exactly buddy-buddy with each other, although they both claimed all had been forgiven and forgotten, and that they'd made up. But I didn't buy that for a second, because I'm quite sure underneath your husband's stoic veneer, he was still venting a little, and I can't blame him for that. If I was wearing his shoes and my best friend had betrayed me like that, I would likely feel the very same. Suffice to say, Adam McFreeze was a little sheepish on the trip, but we all had a fabulous time together, and on the surface everything seemed very good. It's just most unfortunate that things turned out the way they did, with Adam going missing in the way he did, so you can see that this would not look good with the police. Let's just say many crimes committed these days are crimes of passion, are they not? Which is why they're probably signalling out Matt as a prime suspect.
But I don't understand. Matt never told me any of this.
Chancer rubbed his chin reflectively. Well, I can't say I'm desperately surprised. I'm sure that, like the rest of us, Matt wanted to put the whole wretched business behind him. He hardly wanted to bask in a memory that was not very pleasing to him. It broke his heart when Adam went missing, as it did the rest of us, but most especially Matt. because those two were as close as brothers. And as far as you were concerned, Merrill, admitting to you that he'd been engaged to Tara Hewitt might have stolen some of the thunder from your own engagement, if you get my drift.
Sorry, hold it there, Chancer, said Merrill. You've said too much to me. You know way more about what happened to Adam McFreeze. So you better start talking, and talking now. I need to know everything, Chancer. How can I possibly help my husband Matt and prove his innocence in connection to Adam's death without knowing the truth? He might have been lying to me about Tara Hewitt, but I understand about that. But I'll tell you one thing, Chancer. My husband is not capable of murder.
Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Merrill. I think every single human being on this planet is capable of murder, if the environment is right. But none of this is as simple as you think. But I will tell you everything. You deserve to know the truth, said Chancer. Not that Matt will appreciate my telling it to you, but I think hearing it from me will be easier. I can see by your resolute determination to find answers, you will stop at nothing to get them. But I'm warning you, what you're about to hear is not what you would ever anticipate. So brace yourself.
25 years earlier, Matt Blackburn wondered why on earth he'd agreed to come on this camping trip. The fury he felt towards his best friend Adam McFreeze was insatiable. There was a large part of him that wanted to just clobber his friend so hard, punching his lights out, but he knew that despite everything, Adam was as close to him as a brother, and in time he would find it in his heart to forgive his friend. After all, we all make mistakes. Matt Blackburn drove his truck with Adam McFreeze sitting on the opposite seat. They listened to some music together, barely speaking very much. The silence was cutting, until Adam could bear it no longer, so he blurted out his thoughts.
For God's sake, Matt, you don't need to be so prickly. Did I not tell you I'm sorry? What more do you want me to say? I've never regretted something so much in my entire life. If I could take it back, I would, but I can't. I'll do anything to fix this, bro. Make it better between us, which is why I agreed to come camping with you and your friends. I don't want to lose our friendship over this, Matt. I drank too much, and Tara, she was all over me like the tinsel on a Christmas tree. I'm not exaggerating. She was practically tearing my clothes off me. It wasn't the other way round. I'm not making excuses for myself. I was actually pushing her away. I was telling her she was engaged to you, but she was telling me she always liked me, and what you didn't know would never hurt you anyway. What does that say about your fiancé's loyalty, Matt? You don't want to be married to a woman like that, someone you can't trust. In a way, I did you a favour, showed you what she was really like. I was too drunk to refuse her advances, and I got carried away in the moment. But she was the one ploughing me with the alcohol, throwing herself at me indiscriminately. And that speaks volumes, doesn't it, Matt? She's not a keeper. She's a tramp. Did me a favour. Is that what you think? Is this some kind of a sick joke, Adam? Let me tell you, it takes two to tango. You did not exactly push Tara away. You betrayed me as much as Tara did, because you still allowed yourself to be seduced by her. I don't care how drunk you were at the time, bro. You should have walked away from her, but you didn't, did you? And that's what hurts the most, Adam. We've been like brothers, faithful to each other in every regard. And then you do this to me. I loved her. I thought she was the one. And look what you did. Everything you say is right, Matt. It is true. I do remember our pact that we made when we were very young about getting involved with each other's girlfriends. I felt like such a prize cad the next day in my sobriety when I realized what I had done. But what could I do? What could you do? There was a lot you could have done, Adam. For a start, you could have come and told me openly what had happened. But no, you kept it all a clandestine secret, until I found out about it from Lisa Owen. And hearing it from her, well, it was like a kick in the guts, let me tell you. Do you know how devastating it is to hear that your fiancé cheated on you with your very best friend? Imagine if I did that to you with your fiancé, if you had one, and the boot were on the other foot. It's one thing, Adam, to find your fiancé has been disloyal, but quite another when you realize that your fiancé has cheated on you with your very best friend, and your best friend has been disloyal, the person you trusted more than a brother. It makes me feel like an idiot. It's humiliating, insulting, pathetic. Beyond that, completely devastating. I wanted to tell you, Matt, but I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the stomach for it. I knew how much you loved Tara, how much it would break your heart. I just didn't want to do that to you. I didn't want to admit that I had done this to you. I felt so ashamed, so remorseful. But you're absolutely right, Matt. If you did the very same thing to me with my fiancé, if I was engaged, I'd likely want to kill you, tear you apart limb from limb. Hypothetically speaking, of course. About that, I'm sorry, Adam. I'm sorry about shouting at you, calling you those dreadful names, telling you I wanted to kill you, said Matt soberly. I didn't mean to lash out at you like that, but I was furiously angry, enraged. I still am, Adam. I'm going to take time to move past this, I'm afraid. I'm still at the checkmate stage on the chessboard. There are moments I feel like zoning out of our friendship, based on what happened. But you're my best friend, Adam, and I don't want to lose our friendship, even over my fiancé. You make a good point, though. If she was eager to cheat on me like this, then she's not a keeper. I loathe disloyalty of any kind. You were right to say what you did to me, bro, said Adam. I deserved it. What I did to you was despicable. Matt released a huge sigh, shaking his head sadly. I loved her so much, Adam. I really did. I thought she was the one. But all the time she was toying with my heart, like a kid playing with Play-Doh. But let's move on from this, shall we? Because I, for one, want to enjoy this camping trip, and I'm sure you feel much the same. So you forgive me? Asked Adam. I'm working on it, said Matt. It's a work in progress, Adam. But you're right about Tara. I don't know what I ever saw in her. Well, she was pretty enough, was she not? She had a good sense of humour, bro. So I'm not surprised you liked her so much. But it's a good thing it's over between the two of you. It would never have worked. If she was willing to play around behind your back, your marriage wouldn't have lasted 2 minutes. She was never very mature. Always had her head in the clouds. We cannot allow your ex-fiancé to destroy what we have together, bro. We're best buddies, since we were tottering around in our diapers. We cannot and should not ever let a woman come between us.
Matt had let out another sigh. His fists were holding onto the steering wheel so tightly, so that the whites of his knuckles were showing through the skin. He stared at the road ahead of him, trying to fight back the kaleidoscope of emotions whirling around his head like a bright collage of confusing colours. He nodded.
You're right, Adam. I guess I'm a little like a dog nursing an injury, inclined to be snappy and aggressive. But I assure you, like I was saying, nothing shall destroy our brotherly bond. But you're going to have to cut me some slack, bro. I'm pretty grouchy and cantankerous at the moment. A snapping turtle has nothing on me. But we'll move past this, I know we will. I just need time. And this camping trip will help me calm down the inflammation of my woes. It's a good start anyway. Bro, I'm glad to hear you say that. Just so you know, you can snap at me as much as you like. I deserve it. As long as we do move past this, that's all I care about. Do you understand? Of course I do.
It was a magnificently beautiful, very prepossessing spring day when Matt and Adam arrived at the camping ground.
Thankfully, the gate had been left wide open, so Matt didn't have to climb out of the car. But he knew they had arrived at the right place, although they narrowly missed the rusted old sign saying Silvery Breeze Camping Ground. "We're here," said Matt, sounding heartily relieved. He was looking forward to enjoying a can of ice-cold beer by the lake and feeling eager to try his hand at a bit of fishing. All 5 men had brought along fishing rods, and Matt found fishing helped him to relax, and it might help him to vanquish some of his frenzied emotions he still felt towards Adam McCrease. "I'm glad we're here," said Adam, "and despite everything, it's good we came together." Matt's vehicle seemed to shudder and jolt down the earthen road, littered magnanimously with small stones, rocks, and a scattering of fallen leaves from the previous fall. It swaggered rather precariously like an inebriated drunk that had lost all sense of balance and couldn't walk in a straight, steady line. The robust vehicle clumsily dipped over the jagged crevices in the road, upholstered on every side by exquisite open countryside and large viridescent fields where handsome, rather surly-looking steers were munching the grass, looking up at Matt's truck with an inquisitive curiosity, as if to say, "Who do we have here?" Matt navigated his way ever forward, splashing through puddles of dirty water from recent rains, so that his ungainly, robust truck rather resembled an oversized pot-belly pig that had been blissfully rolling around in a muddy bath. But it was all part of the fun of enjoying a weekend's adventure. Soon Matt drove down a narrow road in the middle of the woods, surrounded by tall, lofty, magnificent trees on every side. The sweet gasps of spring had embellished some of the boughs of the trees in tumbles of pretty pink and white blossoms. It was very beguiling. It was early spring, and the best part of this intrepid, wonderful adventure was that there were no other campers around, apart from the black SUV that belonged to his close friend Chancer Miller, who had fanciful aspirations of one day becoming an up-and-coming cosmetic surgeon. His truck was parked under a sculptural willow tree. The tree seemed to be leaning over the edge of the lake, skimming the surface of the water with its outstretched boughs, like an old man, looking for any signs of movement where he could finally cast out his rod in order to get the best catch of the day. Matt could see his 3 close friends, all who were ambitious medical students, were eagerly bustling around preparing a 3-man tent together, which they were skillfully pitching on the edge of the beach, very close to a fishing pier. "Hello there," said Chancer, casually strolling over to Matt's parked truck, giving his friend a goofy grin that lit up his entire face. He looked suspiciously as if his skin had stolen some spring sunshine. It would seem his olive skin looked rather bronzed, and Chancer seemed to tan very quickly. But although he was handsome, he was blindly oblivious to his good looks, which made him all the more likeable. Even though he was desirous about becoming a cosmetic surgeon one day, it had never been about vanity to him. Chancer believed a cosmetic surgeon could make big bucks, which was why he was attracted to the profession in the first place. He fancied owning a yacht one day and taking fabulous trips around the world, and that, he said, you could not do unless you had plenty of money. He had thought about becoming a brain surgeon. He was an exceptionally bright man, but after having been invited to attend a brain surgery as an intern, he had decided against it. "I see you did not escape the muddy puddles on the road," he said, eyeing Matt's car. "They're everywhere, aren't there? I'm afraid there's been a lot of rain in the area, but the weather is improving. It's brilliant today, is it not? The sun's come out." Once Matt got out of his truck, Chancer spoke to him more privately. "How you feeling, bro?" he said in a quiet whisper, taking a long, hard look at the sorry state of his friend. "I'm not going to kid, bro. You have looked better. You look like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards." He paused for a moment and said gingerly, "For the record, I'm really sorry that things between you and Tara Hewitt didn't work out. It sucks. Thanks, bro. I appreciate that. But I'd rather us not talk about it if you don't mind. I came here to get away from it all. And if the truth be told, if I don't hear Tara Hewitt's name mentioned again, it'll be too soon. Of course, bro, I understand that. But for the record, I'm glad she got away, bro. You deserve better than the likes of Tara Hewitt. Way better. He lowered his voice again. I'm surprised to see you came with Adam McFreese. Have you two settled your differences now? It can't be easy for you in the circumstances, knowing your very best friend has rarely messed you around. We're working on it, said Matt. I'm not about to throw a good friendship away over Tara Hewitt. That woman is not going to ruin my life. Good man, said Chancer, patting him affectionately on the back. That's the spirit. That woman isn't worth losing any sleep over. Believe me, I know her sort. On a brighter note, is this not the most amazing campground you've ever seen? I've been coming here for years and years. It's my parents' best-kept secret. I can't get enough of this place, you know. Is it not idyllic? And let me tell you, this lake is fully stocked with a plethora of the finest fish. So if you don't catch anything, Matt Blackburn, then I'm sorry to say, bro, but you've got to be one hell of a lousy fisherman. It's hard not to catch anything in this large body of water, so there are no excuses. So no surprises for guessing what we will be eating for supper tonight. We'll be having fish around that fire pit, and it doesn't get better than that, let me tell you. It sure doesn't, Matt agreed. Adam and I better get our two-man tent pitched next to yours. Then we will join you on the fishing pier. Good thinking, bro. You can join us over there when you've got your tent up, but don't make a noise. We don't want to scare away the fish.
Prisms of soft golden sunlight danced contentedly from a cornflower blue sky, casting an ethereal gossamer light over the silvery lake. It shimmered and twinkled under the generous heat of the morning sun, reflecting on its mirrored surfaces some of the twisted, rather contorted trees hanging over its edge. The prepossessing views of the lake were magnificently beautiful, so much so it took Matt's breath away, and suddenly he was very glad he'd come. Furthermore, he was thankful that Adam McFreese had joined him on this exciting camping trip, even if there was a slight tense energy between the two of them. It was certainly a hell of a lot better than moping around at his student digs, feeling very sorry for himself. There was something about the crisp fresh air, the smell of pine needles on the wind, and the gentle nudges of a coquettish sunshine that made Matt's troubles dissipate, as if the issues that had plagued him of late were not such a big deal after all. It was all a matter of perspective. Even his mother had told him as much.
I cannot say I'm remotely surprised, Matt dear, his mother had told him, when he announced to her that the engagement was off. Number one, you were far too young to get engaged. And number two, I never did particularly like Tara Hewitt when you brought her round to the house. She struck me as being a little flaky. You need a dependable woman, dear, someone you can trust and rely on. Yes, Tara was pretty, but beyond that she didn't have much else going for her. And the fact that she and your best friend, Adam, got together one night, it tells you a whole lot, my darling. You had a lucky escape, you did. You can't blame Adam McFreese for what happened. I don't see this as his fault. He's a very good man, you know. I 1,000% believe him when he said Tara threw herself at him, when he was completely bladdered. And you know what it's like when you're blind drunk. Your inhibitions go awry. You've got to let this go, son. It'll eat away at you like a hungry worm in an apple. You cannot, and I repeat, cannot, just throw your friendship with Adam McFreese away. You're like brothers, the two of you, over a lousy mistake like this. Worse things have happened, you know.
Matt knew his mother was absolutely right, but then again she was a very discerning woman. And he knew that he and Adam had weathered some tough storms in their friendship together in the past, and they could get through this tumultuous time and overcome their differences. The whole drama and fiasco over Tara Hewitt would soon be water under the bridge, and one day they'd be laughing about it. He smiled contentedly to himself as he watched a female duck, surrounded by a plethora of her adorable little ducklings, paddling among the reeds around a little island in the centre of the lake. He also observed a couple of frogs jumping buoyantly from one water lily to another, while a couple of wistful dragonflies serenaded the water like silvery blue fairies. This was going to be an amazing weekend, Matt thought privately to himself. How could it not be perfect, looking out at such spectacular views like this? It was incredible to think that they could enjoy this campground all to themselves, and what could be better than that? By all accounts, the camping ground had not attracted other camping enthusiasts yet, who wisely possibly thought it was way too ambitious, and still far too cold, to brave the dip in the temperatures that the evenings would lightly invite. Winter and spring were still swinging like a pendulum on a cusp, but nothing would put off 5 enthusiastic medical students who were not remotely intimidated by a wee chill in the air. It would seem all 5 young men were eager for adventure and resolutely determined to put the cruel cold days of winter behind them. And what better than to enjoy a spot of fishing together on such a blissfully beautiful spring day? It would seem the day had passed so smoothly, like a tumble of laughter, as all 5 men cast out their rods, enjoying the warm flush of spring sunshine brushing against their faces breezily, along with ice-cold beers that they knocked back from the cooler. They had skillfully managed to reel in from the lake an interesting eclectic mix of bass, trout, catfish, and something else they couldn't identify. But it was so pleasant being cocooned together, like the seeds in a pomegranate, not needing to say anything to each other, but washed in the tranquilizing ambience of this lovely day. Ostensibly, even the uncomfortable uneasiness between Adam McFreese and Matt had almost vaporized rather magically, like a white cloud in the sky just floating away until it was long since forgotten about. Soon the fabulously relaxing day had drifted away like a kayak on fast-moving rapids of white water until it was all gone, and it had happened so very fast. In a trice the day seemed to yawn with a resigned tiredness, while the sun cast out a fabulous farewell visual display across the sky, in bright smudges of tangerines and golds, until finally it slunk away very clandestinely, like a child desiring to hide away from all her friends in a mischievous game of hide-and-seek. The night began to sweep boldly across the sky, like a black curtain being drawn across a stage, and before long the firmament was ablaze with glittering stars and the alluring magical sight of an almost full moon, that cast her shimmering pearly glaze over the silvery water of the lake, that on its mirroring surface reflected the resplendence of the Milky Way. All 5 young men huddled together cosily around the cheerful fire, sitting back on wobbly, unstable camping chairs that Chancer Miller had brought along with him. They were sensibly attired, wearing windbreakers, parkas, and hooded sweatshirts, as the icy fingers from a cold chill unapologetically seeped through their clothing. But luckily the warm, inviting fire crackled away merrily in the fire pit, defrosting their fingers and swathing them in a satisfying warmth, while they enjoyed watching the orange flames hungrily devour the dry wood. The blissful smell of wood smoke filled the air. Soon they had eaten their fill of fish that they had caught, grilling it over the open flames of the fire. It melted in their mouths like butter, and tasted as close to perfection as you could get. There was something delicious about eating al fresco. They roasted corn cobs and ate large portions of potato salad and garlic bread, washed back with still more icy-cold beer. The night was prettily impregnated with the sounds of chirping crickets and frogs, and it was Chancer Miller who decided that on this night, behind an open camp-fire, that a ghost story was well in order, and everyone heartily agreed. For what is a camp-fire without a ghost story? "I will start the ball rolling, shall I?" said Chancer. "I've got a neat ghost story to tell you from my father." All eyes were now focused on Chancer Miller. He had their undivided attention, while a couple of the young men were spiritedly roasting marshmallows on long forks in the fire, and popping the delicious caramelized melted sugar into their mouths. "My dad, you know, is a surgeon," said Chancer. "He's been operating on people for years, and has worked in dozens of hospitals all over America and abroad. I guess it was a given that I would one day follow in his footsteps, although I shall say this, he's not remotely impressed with my fanciful desire to become a cosmetic surgeon,
pandering to people's vanity. He says I should do something more worthwhile, and not something as shallow as making people feel better about their appearance." "Well, someone's got to do the job, have they not?" said Adam. "And why should it not be you? Making people feel better about themselves is not such a bad thing, you know. And if you want to be a cosmetic surgeon, I think you should go for it, Chancer. I think you'll be very good. You've got a steady hand, you're creative, and besides, I've always noticed that women love you, and those are the quintessential ingredients for a great surgeon." Everybody nodded in agreement around the fire, as there was no doubt Chancer would indeed make a very good cosmetic surgeon. Chancer looked at his friends appreciatively, grateful that they had so much faith in him. "Thanks, bro. It's very kind of you to say," he said, looking reflective. "I just wish my father shared your enthusiasm, but I'm afraid he does not. He's got fixed views on things, you know, is stubbornly old school. He thinks the world has all of a sudden gone pear-shaped, with its obvious obsession to looking younger, and I'm afraid my mother agrees with him. Anyway, talking about my father, well, he is the most prudent man you could ever hope to meet, very punctilious and thorough. He's an excellent surgeon, you know. Anyway, he's never believed in all this hocus-pocus stuff and nonsense, and was not remotely superstitious. One night he changed his mind about all of that. He was working at a hospital where the creepy wing had been closed off, due to the strange idiosyncratic things that occurred there, things that the nursing staff could not explain, that scared the bejesus out of them. The staff said that it was haunted, and they wouldn't be seen dead going down that corridor during the night, and they were persuasive enough to get the wing of the hospital cordoned off, so that it was no longer in use. My father typically thought that this was ridiculous, to close one wing of the hospital due to wild superstitious speculations, because they were unfounded, and the hospital needed the extra space. He thought every wing in the hospital should be used productively. He laughed at the nursing staff and said that there was no such thing as ghosts, and that they were feeding their fertile, overactive imaginations. "The mind is a powerful thing," he would say resolutely. "You can believe anything, if you convince yourself enough of it." One of the nurses openly challenged him and said, "All right, Dr. Miller, I want you to go down the creepy way in the middle of the night all on your own, and then you can come back and tell us it's not haunted." My father shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly and said, "Fine, I'm very happy to do that, to prove to you that it is not haunted." There was a gathering of giggling nurses, watching my father venture down the creepy way in the middle of the night. I think they thought he was as mad as a hatter attempting this. But my father was not remotely afraid. It was dingy and tenebrific down the wing, of course it was. So he could appreciate and understand why the ghostly rumours abounded and circulated around the hospital. It looked like the perfect setting for a haunted hospital wing on a movie. "Did he see anything?" asked Adam excitedly. "Hold your horses, Adam, will you?" said Chancer, raising his hand. "I'm getting there." My father proceeded down the wing. In the beginning there was nothing untoward, nothing that irked him. He said it was rather like venturing down any other dark corridor in the middle of the night. Then he observed something being flung into the middle of the corridor, crashing in front of his feet. He bent down to pick it up to discover it was a baby's pacifier. He then continued along his way, and then a teddy bear was thrown into his path. He picked up the teddy bear, and he said this thing was ice cold, so cold in fact it almost burnt his fingers, so he dropped it back on the floor. By now he was rather befuddled. My father immediately thought that one of the nurses had crept up into the hospital wing and was deliberately playing tricks on him. So he said, "This is not funny. I know you're there, so quit playing games with me." He fearlessly went into a little children's ward that I believe had been used for 2 to 3-year-old toddlers. He said it was icy cold in there, and he had a profound sense of not being alone. He felt as if he was being watched. He was rather startled by how much stuff was still around in the ward, gathering a thick veil of dust and cobwebs, so the air felt cloyingly thick. The next thing he knew, something was flung into his back. He turned around to find a kid's comic book lying wide open on the floor by his feet. He had no comprehension how that could have happened, because nobody could have done that. He opened up the comic book, and in bold writing on the paper, in red ink, were the words in large capital letters, "You are dead." His heart began pounding violently in his chest, and a feeling of impending dread overcame him. He almost froze to the spot, he was so frightened. He then heard some disembodied giggling, and the scuffle of tiny feet running across the floor, as if cute little kids were playing a mischievous game on him, and were watching him, hiding behind the door, if you like. Worse still, the door in the ward was swinging open and closed on its own accord, and then something else hit the floor behind him, but nothing was there. Nothing could explain the loud bang he'd heard. My father turned around when he sensed a pair of eyes burning into the back of his skull. It gave him the chills, it did. He knew in that moment that something was standing behind him. He could feel a very formidable presence, and was so terribly afraid, almost too afraid to turn around and look. He said there was this icy cold air blowing breezily at the back of his neck, but it was someone's breath. It wasn't a wind. It was definitely somebody's breathing. My father finally did turn around. His curiosity got the better of him. His heart almost went shooting through his chest. Oh, he was so afraid, because he saw standing in the doorway a young child, wearing a pair of pale blue pajamas covered in penguins, with his back turned away from him, walking past him. My father ran after this little boy, putting his hand through the child to stop him moving any further. But the child had no physical form. He said it was like putting his hand through a hologram. The kid then turned around, and my dad's blood went cold. This menacing child, with huge empty black sockets for eyes, stared at him manically, with a teddy bear in his hand. And then the kid gave him this gormless gargoyle-like smile, and a raspy man's voice came through the kid's throat, and shrieked, "Get out! Get out, or I'll kill you!" My father was so terrified every part of his body began to quiver in terror. The kid turned around and walked away, while my father hightailed it out of that wing as fast as he possibly could. He turned around very briefly to glance over his shoulders, only to see that the child in the passageway was still there, grinning at him gormlessly. It freaked him the hell out. He knew he'd seen a ghost, but more than a ghost, a diabolical, insidious entity. When he finally reached the gathering of nurses, he lied to them, because my father was very proud. He said, "I can't think what all the fuss is about. This place is not haunted." But never again did he challenge them about the creepy way again. But boy, he was glad when he stopped working at that hospital. He never looked back when he left that place, let me tell you. He was always worried that he was going to come in contact with that evil boy again. Everyone stared at Chancer incredulously. Adam ran his hand up and down the arms of his sweater. "Man, that story gives me the chills. I guess when we start working at hospitals, we're going to hear some creepy stories like that. I mean, let's not kid. Lots of deaths occur in hospitals, do they not? So it is the kind of place that lightly invites paranormal activity. But I hope to God I never have an experience like your father did, Chancer. But I'm not surprised he's a believer now." Matt could not remember how long they sat by the campfire talking, knocking back beers and watching the flames of the fire dance over the wood. But soon tiredness got the better of them, and all 5 men turned in for the night, eager to collapse into their sumptuously cosy sleeping bags, feeling ever so slightly bladdered, and satisfied by such a pleasing end to what had been a magnificent day, one that they were unlikely to forget, even if all were feeling a tad unsettled by Chancer's ghost story. They were not to know that something far worse than Chancer's father's ghost story was about to unfold, that was so outlandish
It would have been hard to believe for anyone who had not been an eyewitness to this eventuality. Matt was blissfully lying fast asleep, curled up in his tent, comfortably cocooned in his sleeping bag, where he was awoken to Adam McFreese, leaning over him, shaking him vigorously. So he woke with a start, as he was rudely jolted out of his dreamlike state.
"There's something outside our tent," Adam whispered. "I've heard it walking around."
Matt felt grievously annoyed to be woken up, but his heart softened when he saw the anxious state of his friend's demeanour, whose eyes appeared to be on stalks.
"I didn't want to wake you up, but I needed to take a leak. But there's something walking around our campsite. I'm scared. I can't go out there on my own. I'm desperate to go. I'm literally crossing my legs. I heard the footsteps and strange grunting sounds. Something is definitely out there. And whatever it is, it's big." "I'm sure it's nothing to worry about, bro," said Matt encouragingly. "You're probably feeling a bit wobbly after listening to Chance's ghost story. I don't blame you, bro. It also freaked me the hell out. But if you heard anything outside, it's probably just a raccoon or a fox sniffing around our camp. I mean, let's not kid. Those food smells from our fire last night are going to encourage opportunists like raccoons to scrounge around looking for scraps. And take it from me, those critters can be very noisy."
Adam almost growled at Matt.
"Did you not hear what I told you? There's something out there, bro. I'm telling you, I heard it. And it's not a damn raccoon. Why aren't you taking me seriously, Matt? I'm telling you, there's something outside our tent. I'm not imagining this." "All right, bro, calm down. I believe you," said Matt,
as both men became quiet, listening intently to any outside sounds. But everything seemed very serene, and there were no strange noises, and for a moment Adam began to relax, even attempting a half-hearted smile, as if he was beginning to reconcile himself with the fact that he had been foolishly overreacting, as of course there was absolutely nothing rummaging outside their tent. He looked a little sheepish and bashful as he tried to explain himself to Matt.
"I know you can't hear anything now, but I'm telling you, bro, something was there, crashing around. Thunderously noisy it was."
All of a sudden he paled, the colour evaporating from his skin, so he became a ghostly shade of white.
"Listen! Listen!" he whispered urgently. "Listen! Do you hear that? Oh my God! The noise is coming back."
This time it was Matt's face that paled. He could hear the ponderous footsteps punnelling the ground with a forceful footfall, as the feet skulked around their tent, getting way too close for comfort. Matt knew at once that something was outside their tent, and whoever and whatever it was breathing heavily. He could feel his heart swinging in his chest violently. They heard a few grunting sounds, along with a stifled human-like cough. Matt's face contorted like an ugly gargoyle. He whispered,
"What the hell? What the hell is that?"
His blood ran cold, especially when something slapped the fabric of their tent, as if whipping it for a couple of seconds with the back of a palm. They could hear heavy breathing and grunting, accompanied by the ominous haunting thud of feet padding around their tent. Finally the breathing subsided, as the footsteps seemed to become more faint. They could hear something ferreting around their camping site, and a clanging sound as if a pot was being banged against a grill, or something like that. Then the feet moved away from the camping site, until everything became stoically quiet again, as if whoever or whatever had rudely disturbed them during the night had finally gone away. They both sighed with relief, sensing that they had managed to escape a formidable danger, although what it was they did not know. But something gargantuan had indeed been plodding around their tents, and whatever it had shaken both young men to the core. Finally it was Matt that summoned up the courage to take a peek out of the tent, sighing heartily with relief that nothing was actually there. Everything outside the tent looked benign and undisturbed.
"I really need to take a leak," said Adam earnestly. "I have no idea why I didn't wet myself." And although nothing is there, I don't want to go alone, bro. My heart is still punneling in my chest. If you don't come with me, Matt, I will wet my pants." "Of course I'll come with you," said Matt. "Besides, I need to go myself. I drank way too much beer last night. My bladder needs prompt emptying."
They both clandestinely slipped outside the tent, piercing the dark, ambiguous, rather obscure shadows with the obtrusive light of their very bright torches, which brought them a smidgen of relief. The bewitching night looked serene and benevolent, as if nothing untoward had dared to trespass in their vicinity, and even the reassuring trills of the crickets and frogs gave them a profound sense that all was well. Both young men had decided to move towards a gathering of trees where they would relieve themselves. The moon shimmered through the black canopy of the night, casting her hauntingly ethereal shadows over their camping site. They gingerly tiptoed past Chance's tent. They could hear the loud sounds of their sleeping friends. One of them was snoring particularly loudly. It was likely Chancer. It would seem that none of the others had heard the sound of their strange nightly intruder. It was then that Matt let out a gasp. He was pointing towards the fire pit with his torch. They could see the stones around the fire pit had been moved. They were shaped into a strange, rather curious pattern. "Bloody hell," said Matt, walking with his friend towards the fire pit. "Someone has arranged these stones into some kind of cryptic message, as if it's supposed to mean something. What the hell does it mean?" As they began to study the enigmatic stone arrangement with a perplexed curiosity, they looked up to see this huge, hulking black silhouette, standing only yards away from them, staring at them with these menacing yellow eyes. It was Adam, who rudely shone the light of his torch into this thing's eyes, and it was this spontaneous action that brought on the creature's furious rage, as if he did not take kindly to having an invasive light plunged directly into his eyes. For a moment Matt froze to the spot like an ice statue, his eyes going round with terror, for this creature, standing yards away from them, was a massive male Bigfoot. In those brief seconds, Matt deduced that the powerful, brawny creature was easily over 8 foot tall, built with a formidable muscular girth, easily on par with that of a farming tractor. The Bigfoot was covered with long, flowing dark hair. He was shaking his body furiously, as if Adam's impulsive actions of shining his torch into the creature's eyes had offended him greatly. The Bigfoot was almost certainly male, as every cell of his body oozed testosterone. He began to scream, thundering his fists against his chest and growling furiously at Adam. All of a sudden the Bigfoot lost patience with Adam and glided over to him, grabbing him violently by the hands, shaking him fiercely and swinging him around in his arms as if playing with a puppet on a string. Adam began to scream in terror, an ear-piercing, shrill scream capable of waking the living dead. For a moment Matt thought that the Bigfoot was going to kill Adam, but through the dark night a gunshot sounded, and then there was blood all over Adam's shirt as he fell backwards from the Bigfoot onto the ground. The Bigfoot stood there for a moment, looking down at Adam with a puzzled look on his face. Then he observed the blood, and the man that he had been holding moments before, lying flat on his back, staring up into the night with vacant eyes, like that of a dead fish. This time the Bigfoot's yellow eyes glared at Chancer, who stood there only a few feet away with his rifle in his hands, horrified to realize what he'd done, for inadvertently by trying to kill the Bigfoot, he'd accidentally killed Adam McFreese. The Bigfoot thundered towards Chancer before he could react, grabbing the rifle from him so powerfully that Chancer was thrust backwards violently on his feet and went crashing to the ground with a mighty jolt. Both Josh and Pete were frozen to the spot, unable to even move a muscle, as they observed this incandescent, belligerent Bigfoot breaking Chancer's rifle apart, so that it began flying into the air like pieces of falling shrapnel. The Bigfoot glared at all the young men, who were shaking like trees that were being blown by a feisty windstorm. He stamped his foot to express his indignation, letting out a shriek, and then bounding away into the woods, until he was finally gone. There was an agonizing, crippling silence as everybody just stood there, unable to comprehend what they had all just witnessed, for they had been flung from the realms of a peaceful sleep into a contorted, jagged, horrifying reality that seemed so surreal, far too impossible to digest. Chancer was the first to bounce out of his paralyzed state. He ran over to Adam, dropping to his knees, shaking the young man. "Adam! Adam! Wake up!" he said, slapping Adam's face. But Adam was covered with blood. "Can you hear me, Adam? Can you hear me?" He reached for Adam's pulse and looked up at his friends, shaking his head. "He's dead. I killed him. I thought I'd get the Bigfoot. I got Adam instead. It was a dreadful, dreadful accident. Adam, Adam, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do this to you," he said, apologizing to the dead corpse. For a long time, there was a thorny silence that cut everybody's emotional calm into shreds as they assimilated the gut-wrenching, cruel reality that Adam McFreece was dead. It was like a stone being jammed in the back of your throat that you could not swallow. It was Matt that dived onto his knees and began grabbing his friend, holding Adam's limp body to his chest like a rag doll, and howling like a baby. "Look what you've done, Chancer! Look what you've done! You've killed my best friend! Why did you shoot? You were stupid! How could you shoot?" "It wasn't Chancer's fault," said Joshua gingerly. "I saw the whole thing with my own eyes. Chancer didn't have any choice but to shoot at the Bigfoot. Regretfully, the bullet ricocheted. It got Adam instead of the Bigfoot. The Bigfoot looked like it was going to hurt Adam. Chancer did what he needed to do, and at least we scared the Bigfoot away." "We need to call the emergency services and police at once," said Peter earnestly. "Tell them everything that happened. Explained it was a grievous accident." This time it was Josh who let out a laugh. "Are you kidding, Peter? What are you smoking? Are you delusional? We can't possibly call the police. Imagine we tell them about this Bigfoot visiting our camping site in the middle of the night. They're more than likely going to think we're spinning a fictitious, far-fetched, implausible yarn that we invented together to cover for our friend. They're never going to believe a word we say. I know I wouldn't. If the boot were on the other foot, can you imagine it? 'Officer, I'm sorry to have to inform you, but this monstrous great big Bigfoot tried to attack Adam McFreece because Adam shone a light in his eyes, which made the creature belligerently angry. Chancer came to the rescue with an unregistered illegal firearm and accidentally killed Adam McFreece. Oh, and by the way, the Bigfoot fled. But cross my heart, hope to die, the Bigfoot was real. And no, we didn't make this tall story up. Think about it for a moment. If a story doesn't seem plausible, it most likely is not. We know what happened is true, but they have no idea. They're going to believe it's spurious and made up. They're going to think we're covering for one of our friends, because we don't want to blab on each other. That's how the police think. I know how it works, bro. Look at us. We're medical students with aspiring careers ahead of us. And this incident could literally ruin our reputations. It could destroy our careers as doctors. The police likely think the abominable snowman or Bigfoot is most certainly a fictitious creature of fiction. I know I did until tonight. Until tonight, everything I believe has been shattered. I mean, look at me. I'm shaking like a leaf, still struggling to make sense of this. I cannot believe or even fathom that this actually happened, but it did. And these creatures are real, and they do exist. But if we tell the police the true story, they are not going to believe a word of it, and I can assure you of that. Furthermore, look at the unfortunate fight that Adam and Matt have been having of late. Everyone knows about Matt's engagement to Tara Hewitt being torn to shreds by Adam's betrayal. The police will believe that Matt had a reason to kill his best friend in a moment of jealous rage, and that we're covering up for him,
as we are close friends who don't tell on each other. You know what the police are like, always jumping to conclusions. They'll look at anyone who has a motive to kill Adam, and they're not going to believe in this Bigfoot stuff and nonsense for a single moment. Our tall story is going to be swallowed with a great deal of doubt and skepticism, and the police will believe we are hiding something. They still probably will, but if we get rid of Adam McFreese's body, they cannot arrest us for anything, as without a body, there is no evidence. My God, you're right, Josh. This isn't going to look good when we tell the police about the Bigfoot, and then they learn about Adam betraying his best friend by breaking up Matt's engagement. They're going to think this is a cover-up when they see that Adam died from a gunshot injury. Everyone knows from the stats that many murders stem from betrayals over love that has been lost. We've got far too much to lose with our medical careers ahead of us, said Josh. We need to fix this problem before it comes back to bite us. Well, what do you propose we do? Asked Matt. I think we need to come clean with the police. You're suggesting we should cover this up, he said, shaking his head. I think it's a bad idea. I think we should tell them what happened. I think we should cover this up, said Josh. I really do. We need to be practical here, Matt, because you could be in deep trouble, mate. I think we should bury Adam's body further away in those trees over there. I notice Chancer has a trowel in the back of his truck. We can all take turns in digging the grave. I agree with everybody here. We've got to get rid of this body, said Chancer. But wouldn't it be easy to drop the body into the lake? I notice there's a boathouse with a few rowing boats in it. We could use one and take the body out into the middle of the water and just drop it in there. Absolutely not. Think about it, said Josh. If Adam goes missing, in the first place, the police will look in the lake. They'll send divers into the water, and they'll recover Adam's body, which will unfortunately reveal that he was killed by a gunshot. And then the first people they will look at is us. They'll know that we are responsible. What about those cadaver dogs? They smell dead bodies. Supposing the police use one to track down Adam McFreese's body. Very good point, said Josh. I've been on a drag hunt in the UK. You can actually make a trail for those dogs to follow that leads to nowhere. We can play the same game with Adam's body. We drag it all over the grove to confuse any dogs and hope to God it works, as the scent will be absolutely everywhere. If we bury him deeply enough and make the ground look as undisturbed as possible, we'll be all right. We can get away with this. Think about it. If there is no corpse, no arrest can be made, and we will keep Stom. Everybody shook their heads despairingly, but finally all agreed that the story of the Bigfoot attacking Adam would not be believable to the police and would likely look like a convenient cover story. In the end, Adam McFreese's deceased body was dragged over the woodgrove and positioned at the edge of the lake to entice a cadaver dog to believe that the body was actually in the lake. Finally, everyone set to work to bury Adam's body, and everybody said farewell to their beloved friend. Hearts were heavy with great regret over what had so tragically transpired. It's Adam's parents I feel very sorry for, said Matt, shaking his head sadly. I mean, not knowing what happened to their son is likely to eat them alive, but there is not much we can do about it. So there you are, said Chancer, looking at Merrill. Through narrowing eyes, that's what happened. We informed the police that Adam was missing. We told them we heard strange noises during the night, which was true on Matt's part, because he had heard grunts. The police were naturally very suspicious of your husband, once they heard about the blow-up between Adam McFreese and Matt over Tara Hewitt. They suspected we were all hiding something, but without a corpse they couldn't prove a thing. The divers were called to investigate the body of water, and a cadaver dog was used on the scene, but I believe it was terribly confused, so our plan worked. But based on what you've had to tell me, Merrill, about the police interviewing your husband, this has opened a whole new can of worms. And after all this time, telling the police about the Bigfoot and what really happened is going to be met with great suspicion. I suspect they will know, even with a degraded corpse, that Adam was killed by a gunshot injury. So this whole thing is going to turn the light of suspicion on all of us again," said Chancer, running his head through his hair in frustration. "This is such a mess, Merrill. What the hell are we going to do? This is not going to go away."
"I'll think of something," said Merrill. "There is no way that you or Matt are going to go down for murder over something you never did. But for the record, I believe your story, Chancer. I've never believed in Bigfoot before, but when you told your story, I unequivocally knew you were telling me the truth. And if I believe you, then not all hope is lost." Chancer shrugged his shoulders.
"I don't know what you're going to do, Merrill, but if anyone can get the fly out of the soup in one piece, it's you."
Merrill got up from her chair, her eyes glancing from Chancer's earnest ones to the long line of breast implants lined on the desk. She smiled when she realized Matt had been playing with the breast implant through his entire conversation. "You'd be better off with a stress ball," she told him, "and don't you dare put one of those implants in a woman's chest. It might spontaneously combust."
Chancer grinned bashfully. "I wouldn't dare. Don't you worry, Merrill. These are all demo models that I show my clients. When I put breast implants into my patients, they come directly out of the packaging."
"Good. Glad to hear it," said Merrill. "I really appreciate you telling me everything, Chancer. I knew coming to see you would be very fruitful." And with that she marched out of his office. The mean-spirited receptionist with the cold dark eyes glowered at her as she waltzed past the reception desk, her mind awhirl with what she was going to do next. Once she had collapsed into the front seat of her car, she phoned her husband Matt on his cell phone.
"Hello?"
came Matt's very deflated voice. "I know absolutely everything," said Merrill. "I've been to see Chancer. Why the hell didn't you tell me you were engaged to Tara Hewitt?"
"He told you everything?" came Matt's befuddled voice. "I don't understand. We all agreed to keep stum about this."
"Yes, he told me everything. I know about the Bigfoot and Adam McPhree's accidental death. I know why you covered it all up. And you know what? I understand why you did it. This whole thing is a mess, and I'm mad at you for not sharing any of this with me. I'm your wife, Matt, for God's sake. Don't I at least deserve to know the truth?" Matt sighed at the other end of the telephone.
"My God, I can't believe Chancer told you everything."
"He did. Get over it." There was an awkward silence at the end of the phone, and then Matt said,
"I didn't tell you about Tara Hewitt. I wanted you to feel special when we got engaged. I figured if I told you that I'd been engaged before, it would steal your thunder. You see, sweetheart, at the time I thought I was hopelessly in love with Tara Hewitt, but I just had a huge crush on her. The feelings I had for her are nothing like the feelings I have for you. I mean, she was a pretty girl, of course she was, and to be fair to her, she had a fabulous sense of humour. But my mother was right. She was as flaky as puff pastry, pretty much all hot air and nothing else. I saw her once, you know, about 5 months back in Walmart. I barely recognised her at all. She looked like a beluga whale. Mind you, I've always been rather partial to beluga whales, but you know what I'm saying. She's let herself go to seed. Life has been tough on the poor thing. She told me she's been through 3 divorces, so I had a lucky escape, I did. I remember thinking, thank God that ship passed me by in the night. She came from a dysfunctional family, you know, so it's hardly a wonder her life is a mess. Mind you, the way things are looking now, mine's pretty much a mess too. A complete screw-up, you could say. Yes, it is, Matt. The police are going to think you killed Adam McPhree out of a jealous rage. It doesn't look good for you. But one way or another, I'm going to sort this mess out. What do you propose doing? Asked Matt. I don't think you should get involved, Merrill. I really don't. You'll only succeed in stirring the pot and making things 1,000 times worse. I think all we need to do is to maintain our story from all those years ago, not change it in any way. We explained that while we were on a camping trip, we discovered that Adam was missing. And if they say they discovered Adam was shot dead, by an autopsy report that confirms this, we can all maintain that a stranger must have entered our campground and shot him.
But I don't think that's going to wash, Matt. I really don't. You should see that Detective Wilder. He's sniffing around the place, and he really is on to you, Matt. He thinks you're behind Adam McFreese's death. He really does. I can see it in his eyes.
But you believe the story Chancer told you?
Oh, I 100% believe his story, said Merrill. He wasn't lying. But come hell or high water, I'm going to get you out of this mess, Matt, even if it kills me. Yesterday, when Frida left for university in Boston, I wanted to tell you I thought my whole world had come apart, as if the rug had been pulled from beneath me. But now, the thought of losing you, no, it just can't happen. And I won't let it happen under any circumstances. I will do everything in my power to stop this.
I'm sorry, sweetheart. I can imagine how desolate you must have felt after Frida went off to university. I know that Frida has been your whole world since we moved to Malden Hall, and I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. It couldn't have been easy to see her go off like that, given you've invested so much of your life in her over these last few years.
Believe me, darling, it was not easy. But when that Detective Wilder came sniffing around our property, asking about your whereabouts, I thought I was going to be violently sick. As if in one day a wrecking ball had been thrown at my life. As if not only was Frida gone, but that I might lose you too. And that is not going to happen. Detective Eric Wilder, he's got eyes like a ferret, you know. He had that kind of resolutely determined look on his face that I knew looked like he meant business. In that moment when he mentioned Adam McFree's disappearance all those years ago, I knew not only that the case had come back to haunt us, but that you were a key suspect in the investigation. When he mentioned Tara Hewitt to me, and told me he suspected you had not been completely forthright about her with me, I knew that something dreadful was about to happen, and I'm not wrong. We've got to stop this, Matt. We've got to stop it before things get out of hand.
Matt sighed down the telephone. Merrill, please don't get upset about all this. We'll think of something. I'm sure we will. But I am sorry that I kept this secret from you for so long. We shouldn't have any secrets between us.
You're right, sweetheart. You should never have kept this from me.
2 nights later, Merrill was glad her husband was not with her at Malden Hall, for a very pacific reason, that she'd been mulling over in her head, which would have been rather problematic for her to orchestrate if Matt were around. For one thing, he'd likely stop her from doing what she was about to do, protesting that she'd likely create more problems for him and his friends, who had covered up the truth about what had happened to Adam McFreese all those long years ago. And the cover-up was a crime in itself, which could get all 4 doctors into serious trouble. Merrill knew she had to get her husband out of this sticky mess, rather like masterfully extracting a drowning bee from a bottle of honey, and helping it to emerge unscathed and still being able to fly away perfectly. On this evening, Matt was doing emergency surgeries with some other highly skilled surgeons, as a minibus containing several people had collided in a head-on collision with a truck that had been driving on the wrong side of the road. The minibus had been a write-off. The truck had fared fine, with only a few bumps and scrapes. But the inebriated lorry driver had been arrested for drinking an excess of alcohol. He was swearing like a sailor, cursing his wife, who he discovered had been cheating on him. No doubt he was devastated, which was why he had been over the limit, but not realizing how lethal a weapon on the road his lorry had become. Many surgeons had been called out to help to perform some life-saving surgeries on some of the victims of this collision. Luckily no one had died, but lungs had collapsed, bones had been broken, and some life-threatening injuries needed addressing to save lives. Matt thrived in helping out in situations like this, as he was an excellent surgeon, and had spent many years working in accident and emergency, and he was more than qualified to lend an invaluable hand in cases like this, when all hands were needed on deck.
"It's mayhem over here tonight. Doctors everywhere," he explained to Merrill. "Lots of patients requiring immediate surgery. I don't think I'm going to be back home tonight, Merrill, I'm afraid. I'm standing in with a surgeon who's doing numerous surgeries on this one woman. She didn't fare very well in the accident. Meryl drew in a sharp breath. She is going to be all right, isn't she? She asked, praying a silent prayer for the patient. The one thing Meryl had learnt about her husband's job over the years was that it was never easy to hear about the horrifying accidents that happened to people that caused them to end up in A&E. "I'm quite sure the patient is going to do just fine," he assured her. "That's a relief," said Meryl. "I'll see you when I see you then. Good luck with the surgery." Now that her husband Matt was conveniently out of the way, and Malden Hall was as empty as a finished can of baked beans, with the only sorry occupants in the farmhouse being herself and Mr. Dogood, Meryl had felt the dreadful absence of her daughter Frida no longer being at home with her. But she couldn't dwell on Frida's absence any more. There were bigger fish that needed to be fried. Meryl knew her husband Matt could not stand in her way, as a formidable uncertain barricade to prevent her from doing what needed to be done tonight. She knew how he'd react if he knew what she was about to do. "But Meryl, you can't. Have you lost leave of your senses?" he would lightly say. "I wish to God Chancer had not told you what happened all those years ago. Now you see why I never shared all this with you." She wasn't sure if her decisions would actually backfire on her. She knew everything you did in life involved risks, and what she was about to do was a very big one. It would seem her husband believed that all 4 doctors that were on that camping weekend with Adam McFreese all those years ago intended to keep storm, almost as if their silence would make the problem just dissipate like a windstorm that finally abates, or a soft flurry of snow that never settles. But Meryl knew that this problem was not going to go away. Eric Wilder had been sniffing around her husband unabashedly, with far too much interest, like a hungry vampire bat smelling blood. And if things went badly awry, her husband could potentially be accused of Adam McFreese's murder, as it would seem he was the one that had a good motive to kill his best friend. The police were always interested in motives, and as far as Meryl was concerned, a motive had the power to get her husband locked away for good. Over the last couple of days, Matt had looked so bedraggled, like a sorry canary that was recovering from an attack with the household tabby, and to see Matt wrought with so much needless worry and anxiety was tearing Meryl apart. She knew her daughter Frida was unlikely to ever return home for good, as she would likely be looking to embrace an independent life, where she was no longer tethered to her mother and father's apron strings, which would mean for the foreseeable future Malden Hall would feel like an empty shell, and if her husband Matt was locked away in prison for something he didn't do, Meryl would lose her mind. "You can do it, girl," Meryl told herself, "and more to the point, you must do it." She recited these words over and over again like a mantra in her head that needed to be repeated. It was a little chilly as Meryl put on her parka over her jeans and sweater, wrapping a warm knitted scarf around her neck. She started up the engine of her SUV, allowing Mr. Dogood to come along for the ride. Mr. Dogood thought all his Christmases had come at once, and let out an orchestra of interesting woofs. He bounded ebulliently to the back of the truck, his slobbery wet nose pressed against the window, as the tires of Meryl's car rhythmically rolled down the roads. Meryl made her way to the address of Detective Eric Wilder, whom she discovered from her industrious research lived half an hour away from their home. There was no way she wanted to see him down at the police station, where cameras were employed during every interview. Meryl did not want the camera to bear witness to what she had to say to Eric Wilder. She could only hope that the detective would actually believe what she would reveal to him, and that she was not inadvertently stirring up more trouble for her husband. Sometimes you had to take the bull by the horns and do what needed to be done. The drive was inauspiciously dark, as the detective lived away from town, in a house that reminded her of a gingerbread house, stuck together with icing sugar. The detective lived on a small plot of land, heavily fringed by lofty pine trees. She drove through an open wrought-iron gate, onto an asphalted driveway, up towards the house, which was brightly lit up, so she was pleased that someone was up and about. It was 10:30 at night, and was ridiculously late for anyone to receive fortuitous visitors, but it was tough. She knew she needed to do what she needed to do. Meryl parked her car in the driveway,
She could see the ambiguous shape of a face staring at her through the window, and curtains twitching. So she knew she'd been seen. She slammed her car door, exited her vehicle, persuading Mr. Dogood to be a good boy, and began to make her way to the front door, that on her arrival was promptly thrust open. A black Labrador ebulliently bounded out of the door, sniffing her feet and thrashing his tail enthusiastically. "Boomer, get back here now," said Eric Wilder, sounding annoyed. But Boomer did not heed his owner's calls, but continued to sniff around Meryl's feet. It was rather surprising that Mr. Dogood remained stoically still in Meryl's car, watching everything from the car window, but not even barking once. "I'm so sorry, Detective Wilder," said Meryl. "I imagine Boomer here is smelling my golden retriever. Mr. Dogood, I've left him in my car." Eric Wilder stood there in the doorway, wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt, with the name of his favourite ice hockey team brazenly thrust over the red sweater in a splash of white letters. He frowned at Meryl, raising his thick eyebrows quizzically, like two big black furry caterpillars. "Why, look what the cat has dragged in," he said, with a note of sarcasm in his voice. "If I'm not mistaken, it's Mrs. Blackburn. You're Matt Blackburn's wife, are you not? What the hell are you doing at my property at this time of the night?" Meryl stood her ground, staring into the challenging steely brown eyes of the detective. They were like two laser beams, glaring right through her. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wilder, but I came to see you in private. I didn't want to come to the police station for obvious reasons. For one, what I have to say to you cannot be told in the presence of a camera, or other interfering eyes and ears." "Why not, Mrs. Blackburn? I conduct my business at the station, not here at home. This is not how things are done. Do you realize how rude it is to show up at someone's residence in the middle of the night, especially as late as this? How did you find my address anyway?" he asked gingerly. Meryl grimaced. "Your 14-year-old son put some pictures online. I recognized the house. It wasn't hard to figure out whereabouts you lived." "You'd make an impressive investigator, Mrs. Blackburn," said Eric Wilder, unable to disguise his admiration, but still looking a tad annoyed by her unwelcome presence at his front door. "Are you not going to let our guest in, Eric?" said a young woman, pushing past her husband. She was wearing a silken dressing gown covered in bright, colourful flowers. She looked at Meryl apologetically. Her brown, spirited eyes twinkled with humour, and her olive complexion gleamed with robust health. "You must forgive my husband. He's not actually endowed with social graces or niceties, I'm afraid. He's inclined to be rather cantankerous at the very best of times. I should know. I'm married to the bugger. Please come in," she said. "Can I tempt you to a mug of hot chocolate topped with marshmallows? I make a mean cup of hot chocolate," she said, looking towards Meryl's car and letting out a delighted gasp. "Oh, my God, is that your dog? He's so gorgeous. I love golden retrievers." "That's right, he is mine," said Meryl. "He won't be a problem, I promise you. I'm going to leave him in the car, if that's all right with you." "You can't do that," said the young woman. "It's lonely for him in the car. Bring him in. Boomer would be so happy to have a friend." Soon Boomer and Mr. Dogood were bouncing rambunctiously around the house, like two old friends that had known each other for years and years, and their enthusiasm seemed to knock the stuffing out of Detective Wilder, who couldn't help smiling at both of the dogs. Before long, Meryl was comfortably seated at the kitchen table, drinking the most delicious hot chocolate, while Eric's wife insisted on making herself scarce. "I understand you need to talk to my husband in private, so I will leave," she said. But there was a questionable curiosity in her eyes that suggested she was aching to know what Meryl wanted to share with her husband. Meryl liked her at once. She was a wholesome woman with the kindest heart, who was obviously Creole. Eric, who was sitting opposite Meryl, was drinking back his hot chocolate and studying her keenly, wiping away the white moustache of milk from his face. "Good stuff, this," he said appreciatively. "My wife makes the best hot chocolate in the entire world. So go on, Mrs. Blackburn. If you've got something important to say, say it." Meryl involuntarily shuddered, as she shook somewhat nervously. considering the mountain that she had to climb with Detective Wilder. There was a tiny voice in the back of her head, parroting the words, "He'll never believe you. Never, never believe you." But Meryl refused to be discouraged. She made a steeple gesture with her hands. "I've come here tonight, Mr. Wilder. I know you think my husband killed Adam McFreese. I want to tell you, you've got that horribly, horribly wrong. What happened to Adam McFreese was a dreadful accident, and 4 medical students at the time panicked. And you know why they panicked, Detective Wilder? They were worried that people like you would never believe their story. Because the story I'm about to tell you is so incredulous, you'll be shaking your head and saying, 'I'm sorry, but that's crazy.' But hand on heart, Detective Wilder, it really happened, and I need you to hear me out." Meryl had certainly got the detective's attention. His eyes sharpened like that of a hungry hawk. "So you know what happened to Adam McFreese?" he said soberly. Meryl chewed her lip awkwardly. "Well, no, I did not when you visited Malden Hall to speak to my husband at the time. I did have a vague knowledge of Adam McFreese's disappearance. Of course I did. What I also didn't know was that my husband knew exactly what happened to Adam McFreese on that camping trip, as did the 3 other medical students with him." Meryl took a sip of her hot chocolate to steady her nerves and shook her head. "Go on," said the detective. "I knew your husband was hiding something, Mrs. Blackburn. I've been a detective all my life, and your husband is not a good liar. His body language gives him away. I knew he was not telling me something. He was very evasive and shifty." "He is a terrible liar," Meryl agreed. "Anyway, whatever you may think of my husband, Detective Wilder, Adam McFreese was his very best friend. On the day that Adam died, the 2 of them had made up to a degree. Just so you know, Detective, I visited Chancellor Miller. He's a cosmetic surgeon, and a good one at that. I knew he was the balloon I could pop to give me the answers I was seeking. But I was not prepared for what he was about to tell me. But when I learned what really happened, I also comprehended why they covered it up at the time. If I were wearing the same shoes, I think I would have done much the same. And do you know what, Detective Wilder? I think you would have too in the circumstances. I came here, Detective Wilder, because I do not want my life to implode. On the day you came to Malden Hall, after the body of Adam McFreese had been discovered, I knew the moment I saw you that you were a detective that would stop at nothing until you got an arrest, and you believed emphatically that my husband was guilty of Adam's death, because in your opinion he had a great motive. I mean, what could be a better motive? Engaged man seeks revenge on best friend who cheated with his fiancée. The one thing I will tell you about my husband, Detective Wilder, he's a very, very good man. There is not a single bad bone in his body. And I am not going to allow you to destroy his life over something he didn't do. I'm sorry, but I cannot, and I will not allow that to happen." "You're quite a woman, Mrs. Blackburn," said Detective Wilder, looking at Meryl with a glint of admiration in his eyes. "I've been a detective for many years, Mrs. Blackburn, but hand on heart, I've never met anyone quite like you. Go on, you better tell me what happened to Adam McFreese. You've got my undivided attention." Meryl proceeded to tell the detective the story, and when she mentioned the Bigfoot, his eyes widened. And once the story was over, there was a silence in the room, and for a few seconds all you could hear was the ticking of Wilder's kitchen clock. Then something quite bizarre happened. Eric Wilder's wife almost floated into the kitchen, like an ethereal ghost, in her flowing dressing gown, and she waved her arm in front of her husband. "You've got to believe this woman, Eric. She's telling you the truth. Bigfoot is real. I can see an incident like this could so easily happen. I can't imagine what courage it took for her to come here tonight. You've got to believe her story." Eric Wilder looked at his wife incredulously. "What are you talking about, Maria? Why were you even eavesdropping on our conversation? I thought you said you were going to make yourself scarce, but all this time you've been listening in." She dropped her head shamefully. "I'm sorry. I had to listen. I suppose my curiosity got the better of me.
But before you start being all scathing, Eric, I had an encounter with a Bigfoot myself once, so don't you dare tell her she's making up this story, because she's not. Do you think she'd risk her husband going to jail to tell you a fictitious story like this? She came here tonight because she's terrified of being laughed at or thought of as being as loopy as a fruitcake. People don't like to talk about these things, Eric, for obvious reasons. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter, honey bear, why did you never tell me about it? Why are you telling me now? Maria shook her head furiously. Why do you think I didn't tell you about it, Eric? For the very reason these 4 medical students covered up their friend's body. Don't you see? They didn't want to be blamed for his death. I didn't tell you because you would never have believed in cryptic creatures like Bigfoot. But Eric, these things are real, and this woman here is telling you the truth. I never told you my story because you're so damn scathing all the time. You're so damn skeptical over everything, Eric. Oh, I have to see it to believe it. That's how you think. But I'm sorry, Eric. Life isn't as straightforward as that. These creatures are evasive. They're clever. They've been hiding from us for many generations. But they're real. And they're out there. And just because you think they don't exist doesn't mean that they don't. Many of the Creole people in our culture believe in this creature, referred to as the skunk ape. And those who have seen it wisely keep stum. Because just like I have over the years, it's not wise to talk about these things. Calm down, Maria, for goodness sake, said Eric. I've never seen you so flustered before. You've kept the secret from me for many years, and only now you're telling me. I thought we never kept secrets from each other, but obviously we do. We don't, but I wasn't going to share my story with you or anyone else for that matter, said Maria, tears springing into her eyes. I just wasn't sure that you would believe me. People can be so cruel, you know. They think they know it all. I thought if I told you, you would think I was making it up. But I'm speaking out now, because I know what this woman is telling you is true. Well, why don't you tell us your story, said Eric, gesturing for his wife to sit down at the kitchen table. I know you don't lie, honey bear, so tell me exactly what happened in your encounter with Bigfoot. Maybe it will help me to make sense of what Mrs. Blackburn is telling me, because I'm not going to kid you. The story that I've just listened to is very hard for me to digest, my being the hardened skeptic, as you so delicately put it. Maria looked at Merrill, taking her hand in hers and giving it a tight squeeze. For the record, I believe your story is true. I'm glad you came here tonight, Merrill. It's brave of you, and I'm on your side. I will not allow my husband to get your husband arrested for a murder he clearly did not commit. I've been burning to share my story with someone, but I've been too scared. But I'm going to tell you my story now. Please do, said Merrill. We're listening. Well, I grew up in a stilted house overlooking the bayou in southern Louisiana. My parents were Cajun. I grew up living the traditional amphibious life, inhabiting the world of swamps and bayous, and I chose that existence to live over the waterways. It was all I ever knew. I lived over the swampy waters in a long line of stilted houses with close neighbours and friends. It was a congenial community, and we all looked out for each other. We had simple, modest lifestyles. We were never rich, but we all believed we were millionaires, because life was so fabulously good in our culture. We understood that wealth is never, never about money. It's about the richness and quality of your life. I think I was particularly precious to my family, because my oldest sister was actually eaten by a crocodile. It happens, you know. She was very little, and my mother saw the whole thing, and was unable to do anything to stop it. That crocodile was quick to get his prey, seizing my little sister in his powerful jaws. She lay limp in them like a porcelain doll. I think one snap, and it was over for her. My mother turned her head for a brief second, and that crocodile grabbed my sister so clandestinely, slinking away in the water. My mother screamed, tried to grab the creature by the tail, but it was gone. In the end, several Cajun men found that crocodile and killed it, discovering my sister's remains that were partially digested in the cavity of the crocodile. My mother blamed herself for my sister's demise. So once I came along, she felt she had a second chance to be a mother again. But the problem is my parents smothered me with their love, never kept me out of their sight for a single moment. They were terribly afraid of me winding up in trouble with the crocodile. So I was fiercely protected, much more than other Cajun kids. I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that, and I don't mind admitting I felt as if I was wearing a chastity belt. My dad would take me on his motorboat all over the stunningly beautiful waters of the bayou, with the cypress trees, mosses, water lilies and reeds, and it was always so much fun for a little girl like myself. My dad was a remarkable fisherman, and on the waterways we saw a lot of wildlife as you do, water birds, snakes, frogs, you name it. I loved playing outside our property in the sunshine. One day everyone was getting together to enjoy Cajun shrimp together, and the locals were going to enjoy a party. The pleasing smell of wood smoke filled the air, along with delicious Cajun spices. And all the locals got together and they were dancing and they were singing and they were eating and they were having a fabulous time. But they were so distracted, most especially my parents. And for once in my life, no one was giving me any attention, and I felt so fabulously good. I was 14 years old. I often took the motorboat with my father over the bayou, but never ever alone. Let's just say when the cats are sleeping, the mice can get up to lots of mischief. I remember it was such a prepossessing day. It was fabulously warm. The bayou was magnificent, with the pretty sounds of the bird song and the insects. I decided I wanted to take the motorboat out onto the bayou myself, as nobody could see me. I was hungry for a bit of independence, something my parents had never given me. My father was always telling me I was too young for this, too young for that. I needed to wait until I was a little older to go out on the bayou on my own. Other kids my age were free to do whatever they wanted, but not me. My sister's death had made my parents far too guarded, overprotective, and frankly, totally suffocating. I was so excited to be out there on the bayou, on the motorboat on my own, and I decided to go to a very ambitious part where the Cajun men never ventured, and I never understood why, but I always urged my father, "Please, Daddy, can we go over there? Nobody goes over there. Can't we go there?" And he'd say, "No, we're not going." He'd tell me there were boundaries on the bayou, and this was one of them that should never ever be crossed, but he'd never tell me why. He was so secretive and evasive. So there I was, riding down the bayou in my motorboat, going to the very place I longed to visit, that my father refused to take me to, that he always said was off limits. My heart was fluttering wildly in my chest as if dozens of butterflies were flapping inside of me. I knew I was being naughty. When you're a wee kid and you break into your mum's pantry to steal the cookies, you're terrified of being caught. I knew I was doing something recklessly mischievous, and it gave me a thrill. When I entered that part of the bayou, it was so serenely quiet compared to the other waterways. I didn't hear birds, I didn't hear insects. It was hauntingly airy. So I noticed some of the cypress trees were covered with bones that were dangling off them like Christmas decorations, and then there were these strange cross signs on the trees made with sticks. And I got a profound sense that there was some kind of cryptic message on those trees that was actually telling me to keep away. I remember suddenly becoming terribly afraid. It was like I could sense in my guts that I was not meant to be there, and something didn't feel right. And now I understood why the locals didn't come to this part. Everything looked creepy. The trees, the vegetation, everything. Even the sunlight seemed to have dissipated in that particular part of the bayou, as so many of the trees hung over the edge of the water like decrepit old men that stole all the light. And that was when I saw him. I remember being astonished by this thing. He was built like a giant hairy man, easily 9 to 10 foot tall, 800 pounds. He was solidly built, very robust, with gargantuan proportions, hugely muscular, a face that was so human it astounded me. I got the impression he was very old. He was cantankerous and bad-tempered, and there was grey hair around his chin. His body was covered in long flowing black hair bespeckled with grey patches, and there was dry mud on his hair. When he saw me, he screamed like a banshee, charging towards the motorboat. He shook it violently. I've never seen so much rage. His eyes were burning with indignation. I got the sense I had trespassed into his territory, and he wanted me out. He shook the boat so furiously hard that I was thrown into the water. I was so scared, I swam under the water towards a reedy patch, taking cover there. I didn't stumble across a crocodile, but I did feel something large slithering past me in the water. My heart was thumping so loudly in my chest I could hear every single beat. But I remained hidden. I was so terrified I could barely move. Then I heard the spirited argument, 2 voices shouting at each other, engaged in a strange kind of chatter. The next thing I knew, a hairy hand picked me out of the reeds like a tiny doe, plopping me into my father's motorboat. And this time it was a female hairy giant. She was telling me to go, because next time she told me he'd kill me if I trespassed in that area again. She told me this in my head, and she told me he was a bad-tempered old man, but he would leave me alone if I would go now. I mean, all this just was communicated to me telepathically. I didn't need any encouragement, believe me. I was out of that area like a bat out of hell, and never ventured in those parts again. Nor did I tell my parents about the encounter, because they would have been furious if they knew what I'd done, especially if they knew I'd taken the motorboat out on my own. I remember asking my dad about why the locals never went to that part of the bayou again, and he said to me, "Maria, there are some things it is best you do not know." Eric Wilder rubbed his chin reflectively and said, "I believe you, Honey Bear. And I believe you, Mrs. Blackburn. I'm going to have to take this fragile case to a higher authority. But what you told me, Mrs. Blackburn, will remain strictly confidential." 5 days later, Meryl wasn't sure whether she should answer her cell phone, because the caller ID said unknown number, but she answered it anyway. "Hello, Meryl speaking. Can I help you?" Her husband was spreading jam over his toast, and Mr. Dogood was anchored around his legs, in the vain hope that Matt might just clumsily drop a crumb or 2 under the table. "Hello, Mrs. Blackburn. It's Eric Wilder speaking. Just so that you know, I've spoken to a high authority in regard to the death of Adam McFreese, and I want to inform you that the case is being closed, and the manner of Adam McFreese's untimely death has been labelled as accidental. I've been asked to warn you not to speak of this case to anyone. It must remain strictly confidential. Do you understand?" "Of course. I won't tell anyone. Thank you, Detective Wilder. Thank you so much." "No, thank you, Mrs. Blackburn. You've saved your husband's skin." "Who was that?" Matt asked his wife, as she switched off her cell phone. "Oh, that was Detective Wilder." "Was it?" said Matt. "What did he want?" "Oh, he just wanted to say that the case over Adam McFreese's death has been closed, and the cause of death has been labelled as accidental." "What?" said Matt. "But I don't understand. How can that be?" Meryl grinned to herself, as she might have got her husband out of a sticky mess, but this was a secret she'd keep to herself. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, I don't know what to say. Isn't that the most incredible story? And you can see how it's easy to accidentally kill someone by mistake. And then you have a story where a Bigfoot was involved, and you need to cover it up because you're so worried that nobody's going to believe your story. And isn't it incredible that Eric Wilder's own wife had a story to tell all of her own about an incredible encounter in the bayou where she met the skunk ape, and a very bad-tempered one at that.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.